Hello everyone. Welcome to Sleepcrime. I know many of you like to listen to these stories as you relax or fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy this kind of storytelling, please like the video and subscribe. Tonight's stories are about the quiet moments when trust slowly disappears and the lives that are never quite the same afterward. They remind us that not every danger arrives with a warning, and not every difficult journey ends in darkness. Now get comfortable, settle in, and let the outside world grow a little quieter. I hope tonight's stories keep you company as the night moves on. They held hands in the courtroom. They even leaned in, close enough that it looked like a kiss. It happened in full view of the cameras, broadcast across the country. For many people watching, it was shocking. For one person, it was something else entirely. Jen Carson had once lived an ordinary childhood. Nothing remarkable. Just school days, routine nights, a father who felt safe. Then, in the late 1970s, the marriage ended. Her father didn't just leave the house. He stepped into a different reality and brought someone back with him. The woman moved in quietly at first. Then the accusations started. "You can fool him," she told Jen. "But I know what you are. Not metaphorical. Not symbolic. Literal." She said Jen was a demon. Psychedelic drugs became constant in the house. Not occasional. Not experimental. Constant. The drug use fed paranoia, and the paranoia hardened into belief. They weren't just chosen. They were assigned a task. Witches were real, they said, and witches had to be hunted. Jen waited for her father to interrupt it, to say this had gone too far, to pull her out of the room, out of the house, out of the idea. It never happened. At least 14 people would later be connected to them. 14 lives they claimed were not lives at all, but enemies of God. At some point, belief stops being belief and starts becoming routine. That's usually when things shift. They spoke openly about power, about being instruments, about lists. They even named themselves, casually, as the San Francisco Witch Killers. There were rumors of future targets, celebrities, political figures, and then one name surfaced that made it impossible to dismiss as fantasy. Ronald Wilson Reagan. That was when Jen understood something without being told. Her father wasn't coming back. Whatever had replaced him had settled in permanently. Evil, they like to explain, doesn't build. It feeds. It attaches. It drains. Those were their words. Jen heard them often, usually late at night. She learned how to stay quiet, how to stay small, how to survive inside a system where fear was normal and affection was conditional. Childhood became something else entirely. Eventually, survival wasn't enough. If she stayed, more people would die. June 12, 1982. A rescue crew was sent into the wooded area near Alder Point, California. A group of hikers had vanished. The terrain was rough, visibility limited. Before reaching the search zone, the team encountered two figures moving through the trees. They looked wrong. Clothes in tatters. Hair unkempt. Movements frantic. When spotted, the pair bolted. Not together. In opposite directions, shouting incoherently as they ran. In the confusion, something fell to the ground. A backpack. The rescuers didn't understand the reaction until they opened it. Inside was a firearm, several false identification cards, and a document that didn't read like rambling notes, but like intent. It was titled A Cry for War. The pages outlined violence on a massive scale. Nuclear conflict, targeted bombings, political killings. Mixed in were instructions for identifying witches. Names followed. Most were public figures. At the bottom of the list was the president. At that point, the investigation changed hands. The Secret Service entered quietly and without delay. The people behind the document were already suspected of serial killings. Now they were tied to a direct threat against the head of state. Records were pulled. Histories examined. One detail surfaced quickly. Michael Bayer had once had a family. A wife, a daughter. He had left them behind before the killings began. There's always paperwork before there's understanding. Files arrive before meaning does. Jen's mother realized the truth would not stay hidden for long. She chose to tell her daughter herself. Not gently, not dramatically, just plainly. Jen didn't argue. She didn't cry at first. She remembered camping trips, birthday cards, the version of her father that existed before the new woman entered their lives. But she also remembered when everything bent sideways. Suzanne Barnes arrived with stories of faith and destiny. Before that, she had grown up wealthy, comfortable, protected, the daughter of a newspaper executive, moving easily through high society in the 1960s. Then she grew bored. The second life started quietly. Younger companions, hidden habits, psychedelic drugs layered on top of untreated mental illness. When her husband discovered what had been happening, the marriage ended immediately. He gained custody of their children. Suzanne didn't resist. She didn't linger. She moved on. Michael followed quickly. They married fast, burned through her savings on hallucinogens, and headed west. California gave them space, distance, and people willing to listen. Their beliefs evolved into something resembling a spiritual movement. Not organized, not structured, but insistent. A loose cult formed around them. The first follower was a young woman in her early 20s, Karen Barnes, who had just arrived from Georgia hoping to become an actress. From the outside, it looked like harmless counterculture. Rambling sermons, spiritual talk, nothing unusual for the time. But underneath was a single fixed idea. The world, they believed, was ruled by witches. Suzanne claimed she could see them, identify them, mark them. Michael's role was simpler. He was the tool. Karen likely didn't understand the depth of it at first. Few people ever do. Not until belief turns into instruction, and instruction turns into action. Karen didn't have time to adjust. The shift was sudden, personal, dangerous. Michael started talking about her differently. Not as a follower, not as a believer, as a possibility. He told Suzanne he wanted the young woman as a second wife. It wasn't framed as desire. It was framed as destiny. Suzanne heard threat. Jealousy didn't arrive loudly. It settled in, then hardened. She didn't argue with Michael. She didn't negotiate. She spoke as a prophet, and he listened. That night, while Karen slept, Suzanne gave a simple instruction. Michael went to the kitchen. He came back with whatever was closest. At her direction, he attacked the young woman where she lay. It ended quickly. There was no ritual, no ceremony, just obedience. Karen Barnes was 23 years old. It's hard to understand how fast someone can disappear. One moment they're part of a group, the next they're erased. Afterward they left. Not immediately frantic. Just gone. They traveled north and hid themselves on an illegal farm near a small town called Alder Point. They already knew the place. Earlier that year, they had worked there under false names. Suzanne tended the marijuana plants. Michael acted as security. It was isolated, cash-based, and asked few questions. Months into their stay, another worker arrived. Clark Stevens, a surfer from Southern California. Direct, confident, unimpressed by Suzanne. It began as a disagreement over how plants should be trimmed. That was enough. In their belief system, contradiction was disrespect. Disrespect meant witch. Suzanne decided Clark Stevens was dangerous. She told Michael what had to be done. Michael didn't pause. He believed witches were everywhere. In his mind, delay was risk. He shot Clark in the head. Afterward, he tried to remove what was left. Fire, burial, concealment beneath manure. Days passed. Campers later reported their dog playing with something in the woods. When they looked closer, it was Clark Stevens' head. The couple didn't flee right away. They kept working, kept their routine. They knew the names they were using weren't real. When police searched records, Suzanne and Michael didn't exist. That confidence lasted until the manifesto surfaced. Once the rescue team found a cry for war, everything aligned. The murders matched the language. Some victims were named directly. Karen Barnes, Clark Stevens, others too, at least 11 more. Law enforcement didn't yet have proof. But the shape of the story was forming. Jen's mother didn't wait for confirmation. She took her daughter and disappeared. No calls, no addresses, nothing left behind that could be followed. As they packed, Jen remembered the period after the divorce, when she had been sent to live with her father and Suzanne. Long hours alone in a house that didn't feel safe. Meals altered with hallucinogenic substances. Adults absorbed in visions she couldn't see. There was no one to intervene. Suzanne believed Jen was possessed. Or something worse. The abuse wasn't hidden. It was justified. Physical. Psychological. Framed as cleansing. When Jen's mother finally learned what was happening, she ignored the court order and removed her daughter immediately. Sometimes protection looks like breaking rules. Especially when waiting means harm. They stayed hidden for 3 years. Then Suzanne and Michael returned to Los Angeles. Jen's mother knew proximity meant danger. What she didn't know was that federal agents were already closing in. The couple didn't sense it. They hit the road casually. Less than 30 miles from where Jen and her mother were hiding, they started hitchhiking. A man named John Hellier stopped for them. Friendly. Talkative. The truck had a single bucket seat. 3 people squeezed in. During the ride, legs touched. Nothing more. But in their belief system, contact with the prophet was violation. Suzanne decided John Hellier was a witch. And witches, they believed, were not allowed to live. The gun came up fast. Too fast to plan around. Michael raised it toward John without hesitation. This time, though, the person they had chosen didn't freeze. The truck lurched to a stop. Doors flew open. People nearby saw bodies collide, hands grabbing, slipping, red dripping. The pistol changed direction more than once. No one had control for long. John fought back. He wasn't silent. He wasn't passive. The 2 men struggled in the open, rolling against the truck, then onto the road. Susan stood close enough to touch them, shouting the same words again and again, louder each time. Kill him. Kill him. Kill him. The struggle dragged on. Long enough for exhaustion to set in. Long enough for witnesses to gather. After many minutes, John seemed to gain leverage. The gun tilted away from him. For a brief moment, it looked like he might survive. That's when Susan stepped forward with a knife. She didn't hesitate. She stabbed him repeatedly. John let go of the weapon, instinctively trying to protect himself. That was enough. Michael forced him backward. Susan pushed him down to his knees. 2 shots followed. People screamed. Some couldn't move. Others turned away. Blood was everywhere. Within seconds, Michael and Susan were gone, back in the truck, disappearing down the road. Police spotted the vehicle not long after. The chase didn't last quietly. Speed climbed. Control vanished. The truck crashed into a ditch. Gunfire followed. The couple ran. They didn't get far. Officers tracked them to a river. Wet. Cornered. Out of options. Michael and Susan were taken into custody there. Once they stopped moving, everything caught up all at once. There was no room left for confusion. Detective Frank Falzone had already been circling their names. The murders of Karen Barnes. Clark Stevens. He suspected the same hands were involved. What he didn't yet know was who those hands belonged to. Investigators traveled to Sonoma County to speak with the couple. The response was immediate. Not fear. Not denial. Conditions. Susan wanted cameras. National coverage. Major newspapers. She wasn't interested in a quiet statement. She wanted an audience. They believed exposure would help them. That people would understand. That followers would appear. Susan spoke openly about being chosen. About power. About creation and imitation. Before trial proceedings even began, they proposed a trade. Public broadcast in exchange for information. Law enforcement agreed. During a nationally aired press conference, the couple revealed 2 victims by name. Karen Barnes. Clark Stevens. Jen was 9 years old when she heard it. There are things you're too young to learn that way. But once you hear them, they don't leave. Michael spoke in absolutes. Good versus evil. Creation versus decay. He used language Jen recognized. The tone. The cadence. Her father's voice, filled with ideas she couldn't reconcile. The trial consumed the state. While investigators believed the death count exceeded 14, charges focused on the 3 murders the couple openly admitted to. The courtroom became chaotic. Mystics testified. Spiritual healers took the stand. The proceedings drifted into strange territory. Michael and Susan talked endlessly. About George Orwell. About the future. About the president being evil. About witches deserving death. Their defense rested on psychic attack. They claimed violence was protection. At one point, Susan stood and shouted a question at the room. What was her crime? Beauty. Art. Existence. Then the coroner testified. Photographs were shown. Injuries described. Witnesses to John Hellier's death spoke one by one. The atmosphere shifted. The spectacle collapsed under weight. Once evidence speaks, belief usually gets very quiet. California watched. The label stuck. The San Francisco Witch Killers. Michael Bear Carson and his second wife, Susan. Cameras rolled as they smiled. Jen didn't. The verdicts came back guilty on all 3 counts. Sentences followed. 75 years to life. For Jen, the realization landed late. Not during the chase. Not during the trial. Afterward, when silence returned. The hands that once tucked her in had taken lives. And that understanding stayed with her. Fear settled in quietly. It stayed. Jen began sleeping with knives and scissors tucked beneath her pillow. Not as a plan. More like a reflex. Even after the witch killers were locked away, her body didn't register safety the way her mind tried to. Her mother exhaled for the first time in years. Turned the page. Started over. Jen couldn't. If her father was capable of what he'd done, then what did that mean for her? The thought wouldn't loosen its grip. She slid into a deep depression, one that didn't announce itself, but changed everything underneath. How she saw herself. How she interpreted her thoughts. The fear wasn't that she might be harmed. It was that she might harm someone else. She believed something inside her was contaminated. Inherited. Monster DNA, she called it later. And still she loved him. Love doesn't always disappear when truth arrives. Sometimes it just gets quieter. That love thinned over time, especially once letters began arriving from prison. They weren't comforting. They weren't apologetic. They carried the same voice. The same ideas. The same certainty. She couldn't ignore what those hands had done. The same hands forming the letters. It frightened her enough that secrecy became survival. People around her rewrote her past for convenience, and she let them. The lie became protective. Necessary. She remembers a Thanksgiving years later. An adult now. A serious boyfriend. As they walked up to his parents' front door, he casually mentioned that he'd told them her father died in a car accident. She didn't correct him. Depression lingered. Nightmares followed her into adulthood. Even into her work. One day, while teaching, she nearly fell asleep standing up. That moment broke through the fog. She decided she couldn't keep running from a shadow without a shape. So she chose to face him. In her mind, the meeting was controlled. Glass between them. A receiver mounted to the wall. Distance. Safety. Something that looked like a movie scene. It wasn't that. The door opened, and there was no barrier. No glass. No equipment. Her father was there. Close enough to touch. And he hugged her. She froze. For hours he spoke. About witches. About belief. About the same ideas that had never aged. He had been incarcerated for nearly 15 years, but time hadn't moved inside him. Some people don't change in prison. They just wait. When she finally interrupted him, it wasn't anger that surfaced. It was need. She asked about the murders. Directly. She was searching for something specific. An acknowledgement. A fracture. Any sign of remorse. It didn't come. What came instead was clarity. Not from his answers, but from their absence. She understood then that the father she remembered wasn't gone. He had never really been there. This was Michael Bear Carson. Fully intact. Unchanged. And suddenly small. The power shifted. She left knowing she could stand up to him. That he no longer held authority over her thoughts. The version of him she had loved dissolved into something else. Something trapped. Something contained. She felt free. It didn't last. Prison reforms changed the terms of his sentence. What had once been 75 years to life was overturned. Starting in the middle of the second decade of the new century, both Michael and Suzanne became eligible for parole reviews every 5 years. Jen couldn't ignore it. There was no remorse. No accountability. And without that, she believed release was dangerous. So she made another decision. She would fight. Freedom isn't always quiet. Sometimes it asks for work. When the parole hearing approached, Jen learned she was the only person asked to speak against his release. The responsibility landed heavily. She wasn't just his daughter in that room. She was the voice for the people who no longer had one. She tracked down the families of John Hellier, Clark Stevens, and Karen Barnes. Not because she was required to. Because they hadn't been told. The parole board hadn't notified them. She believed they had the right to know. She reached out first to the Hellier family. The message wasn't long. It wasn't polished. Just honest. She told them she was sorry. That their brother was gone. That his death had been violent. That he mattered. The response was simple. Gratitude. In that moment, Jen understood what her role had become. Not inherited evil. Not destiny. Not blood. Witness. And that was something she could live with. For a long time, Jen believed there had to be something she could fix. Some way to reverse the damage her father had done. If she worked hard enough, spoke clearly enough, stood in the right rooms, maybe the scale would balance. Meeting the families changed that. Each conversation ended the same way. Quiet. Direct. Unmistakable. It wasn't your fault. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly. She understood she had been trying to pay a debt that wasn't hers. No action could bring the victims back. No sacrifice could erase what happened. And responsibility doesn't transfer through blood. She was still the daughter of a serial killer. That fact didn't disappear, but the meaning of it did. Sometimes the truth isn't about changing the past. It's about releasing yourself from it. Jen stopped hiding. She stopped letting others rewrite her story to make it easier to hear. The secrecy that once felt necessary no longer served her. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was something closer to calm. She found a kind of peace in the idea that something constructive could come from what had nearly destroyed her. When parole became a real possibility, she acted. Not alone. She organized a petition. She spoke to the media. And she stood alongside the families of Karen Barnes, Clark Stevens, and John Hellier. People who had lost everything and still showed up. They testified together at the parole hearing. Unified, grounded, prepared. Jen led with her own account, not as a daughter seeking closure, but as a witness to ongoing risk. Against expectation, it worked. Parole was denied. That moment didn't erase the past, but it shifted the future. Jen no longer lives under her father's shadow. The guilt that once followed her didn't belong to her, and she finally put it down. Today, she uses her experience openly. Intentionally. She works in social care, focusing on children impacted by violence committed within their own families. She speaks about trauma without euphemism, about mental illness without apology. She names her own diagnosis plainly. When people say it out loud, it stops being a secret. And secrets are where shame grows. Jen believes silence causes more damage than truth ever could. She talks about grief that doesn't resolve cleanly, depression that lingers, school failure, substance use, the long tail of trauma. She doesn't present recovery as simple or fast, but she believes in progress, in help, in being patient with yourself when the weight feels permanent. She isn't optimistic because the past changed. She's optimistic because she did. And that, she says, is enough to help someone else find their way out of the dark. Story 2. October 9th, 2013. The afternoon bell had already passed when Abby Hernandez stepped out of Kenneth High School. It was a little after 2:30 in the afternoon. She was wearing a striped sweater, jeans, and boots that were still too stiff around the heel. That moment, outside the school grounds, would later be treated as a fixed point. Everything else drifted. No one realized it then. She walked with a slight unevenness, more annoyance than pain. The boots were a birthday gift, early from her mother, Xenia. 3 days until the party. She had talked about it all week. By the time Abby reached the edge of the yard, the bus was already gone. So she started walking. The long way. When Xenia arrived home from the hospital where she worked, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Abby was never careless about time. She always checked in. Always. At first, worry stayed contained. Maybe a friend's house. Maybe she stayed late. The kind of explanations that hold for a few minutes. Then Xenia went to the school. The librarian told her Abby had already left. That was when the shape of the evening changed. I remember thinking, this isn't late anymore. This is something else. Hospitals were called. Nothing. No accidents. No admissions. No trace. Ideas began stacking up with no order. Injury, confusion, something sudden on the road. Running away didn't fit. Not even slightly. Abby loved animals. She was bright, a little rough around the edges, happier outdoors than inside. Problems didn't send her fleeing. They never had. And her birthday was coming. Plans were already in motion. Friends invited. Food discussed. A party she was genuinely excited about. Her best friend confirmed the last normal moment. They had taken a selfie together in science class just minutes before Abby left. Abby looked like herself. No fear. No rush. That photo would become something else later. Not a memory, but a boundary. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. The story didn't end. It stalled. A year later, Abby reappeared. She stood at her mother's door, wearing the same clothes she had disappeared in. Relief never fully landed. What came instead was suspicion. Abby was 14 when she vanished. When she returned, she spoke carefully. She said she had been restrained, confined, shocked with a stun device, forced to wear a control collar. She said she had been held for 9 months. But she did not give a name. Public reaction hardened fast. People questioned the timeline, the clothes, the silence. Some said she ran away. Others said the story didn't make sense. Anger replaced concern. Victims, people said, don't behave like this. It was strange how quickly people decided what she should have done. Law enforcement listened differently. As investigators dug deeper, the outline of the person responsible didn't resemble a typical offender. Devices were found. One was described as an explosive. There were reports that the man believed society was collapsing, that a zombie outbreak was coming. He built weapons at home. Abby said she didn't know his name, then corrected herself. She said she couldn't say it, because he would find them, because he was everywhere. With the weight of disbelief pressing down, and the knowledge that the person who held her might still be armed, Abby was left in an impossible position, expected to explain herself while still afraid. You could hear how careful she was, even after she was back. The case never felt settled. Not then. Not after. Questions remained, hanging where certainty should have been, while the day Abby walked out of school stayed frozen. Striped sweater, stiff boots, and a walk that was never supposed to take a year. From the beginning, even the officers who took the report didn't treat it like a runaway case. They said it plainly to Xenia. Abby was close to home, close to her mother. Nothing in her behavior suggested she had chosen to disappear. She looked, to them, like a regular teenage girl. Ordinary. Predictable in the ways that mattered. Within hours, the disappearance broke into local news. Conway reacted fast. Shock spread quickly, partly because of where it happened. New Hampshire carried a reputation, one of the safest states in the country. The last case people remembered, anything close to this, went back decades. Search efforts expanded almost immediately. Local police first, then the Attorney General's office, state police, federal agents, roads monitored, woods searched, a wide sweep around North Conway, growing outward by the hour. 3 days passed like that. Abby's birthday arrived without her. That evening, the community gathered. Candles, quiet voices, people saying her name out loud, as if sound alone could reach her. You could feel how personal it became, even for people who didn't know her. Xenia spoke publicly during that time. She said she saw Abby in her dreams, that sleep was the only place the fear didn't follow her. Waking up meant starting over. What she didn't know then was how closely that feeling matched what her daughter was already living through. It had started 3 days earlier, on the walk home. Halfway there, a car slowed beside Abby. The driver leaned across the seat and pointed, casual at first. He asked if she wanted a ride. Her feet hurt. The boots were tearing her skin. She hesitated, then got in. Not far into town, the car turned sharply off course, toward a nearly empty parking lot. Something shifted. Abby said she felt it immediately. The kind of awareness that doesn't need proof. She told him she lived nearby. Said she could walk the rest of the way. Her hand moved toward the seatbelt. That's when he changed. His legs straightened. His hands searched between the seats. She saw the gun. From there, control disappeared. She was restrained, her eyes covered. The car moved again. As they drove, he forced her down low, pushing her toward the floor whenever other vehicles passed. She tried to resist. It made things worse. Pain exploded in her leg. Sharp, unfamiliar. She thought she had been shot. She was trying to understand the pain, before she even understood what was happening. It wasn't a bullet. It was repeated electric shock, over and over. Enough to stop her from fighting. She tried a different approach. Calm words. Bargaining. She told him she wouldn't judge him. That she wouldn't tell anyone. She asked if he was going to kill her. He told her to call him master. After a long drive, the car stopped. She was dragged inside a structure she couldn't identify and thrown onto a filthy mattress. When the blindfold finally came off, the space made no sense. Metal under her. Walls padded for sound. Doors secured with locks. And in front of her, a figure wearing a gold-colored Halloween mask. He chained her arms and legs to metal bars around the mattress. Then covered her head with fabric. Then a helmet. Layer by layer. He warned her not to scream. Not to move. He described consequences in simple terms. The next 3 days blurred together. Noise filled the room. Loud music, constant, disorienting. She lost track of time. Light and dark stopped meaning anything. She prayed continuously, afraid that stopping meant being abandoned. She talked about prayer like it was the only way to stay present. At some point, he told her she was on the news, that people were looking for her. He showed her. On his phone, she watched a press conference. Her mother speaking. Searching. That was when she wanted to cry. And we want you back with us, please. That was the moment Abby said the crying finally came. Hearing her mother's voice, knowing no one knew where she was, or what was happening to her. Knowing she was completely unreachable. Her captivity didn't end there. It stretched on. Days blurred together. Close to 2 weeks passed before the man decided something else was needed. He told her to write a letter. He said the police would never stop searching unless they believed she had left on her own. The letter had to look like a runaway note. That was the condition. Abby understood what this was. Not closure. Leverage. So she wrote what he demanded. But when his back was turned, she pressed her fingernails into the back of the page, carving words instead of writing them. Small. Careful. Almost invisible. Help. Kidnap. She knew what it meant to try. And she knew what it might cost her. When he came back, he already knew. He told her he had found the marks. Abby said it felt like her chest dropped inward. Like the end had finally arrived. She believed she would either be killed that night, or somehow get out. Neither happened. Not yet. Instead, punishment followed. Measured. Intentional. He spoke calmly about alternatives. Said he was thinking of something more humane. Then he mentioned a shock collar. Something used on animals. He put it on her. Held the stun device near her feet. The pain was immediate. Overwhelming. Impossible to stay quiet through. She wasn't trying to be brave anymore. She was just trying to stay alive. The man still believed the police would back off if the story looked convincing enough. So he made her write again. Another letter. This time, the words were stricter. Controlled. Dear Mom, I'm sorry I did this. That letter didn't arrive right away. It took another week. A full month after Abby vanished, it was the first sign that she might still be alive. For Xenia, the weeks before that had felt unreal. Numb. Empty. Time passing without substance. Then the letter came. Relief hit first. Then confusion. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Abby's. But the words didn't sit right. The tone was wrong. Familiar, but not. She read it again. And again. Dear Mom, I miss you and love you more than you can imagine. I'm sorry I did this. I've seen your reports on TV and in the papers. Yes, I'm alive. I won't tell you where I am. Xenia felt it immediately. Something was off. Investigators agreed. They confirmed the DNA on the letter matched Abby. That part was clear. What wasn't clear was how it had been written, or under what conditions. If Abby had managed to send it secretly, then exposure could make things worse. If her captor knew about it, the risk increased. For a time, authorities kept the letter from the public. It wasn't proof of safety. It was proof of contact, and that's not the same thing. The Attorney General understood the reality. The letter was the only opening they had. Holding it back protected Abby in one way, but it also sealed off the outside world. Eventually, they made the call. They acknowledged the letter publicly. Asked for help again. Stated clearly that it had been written by Abby, but that someone else might be controlling the situation. They avoided saying she was safe. Questions followed immediately. If she could write, was she okay? Did this mean she had left voluntarily? Was this really an abduction? Authorities stayed careful. The case remained classified as a missing person investigation. But the shift had already happened. Public reaction turned sharp. Skeptical. Loud. People demanded explanations. Said the story didn't add up. Called her a runaway. Said she wasn't in danger. Said the search was a waste. Some even argued she should be billed for the effort. Once people made up their minds, it didn't seem to matter how little they actually knew. The narrative hardened. And Abby, still trapped, felt the weight of that judgment long before she ever heard it spoken out loud. As attention faded, speculation rushed in to fill the space. At Kennett High School, where Abby, her closest friend Miranda, and her boyfriend Jimmy all went to class, the absence became a subject more than a concern. Whispers replaced facts. Theories spread faster than updates ever had. Some reporters stopped calling. Off the record, the explanation was blunt. If it was a runaway, it wasn't a story anymore. Not something worth airtime. Inside the school, gossip followed its usual patterns. Pregnancy rumors surfaced. Assumptions formed without effort. It was easier that way. Police had already ruled Jimmy out. Quietly. Completely. Still, the damage lingered. Once people stop waiting for answers, they start inventing them. At the state level, a decision had to be made. The Attorney General couldn't leave the case in limbo. Abby would be labeled either a runaway or someone taken against her will. Jane Young chose abduction. Her reasoning was straightforward. Abby didn't drive. She left money behind. She carried nothing with her except what she was wearing. A 14-year-old doesn't erase herself like that. By definition, wherever Abby was, she hadn't chosen it. But classification didn't revive attention. With fewer headlines came fewer tips. Calls slowed. Leads dried up. The case didn't officially close, but it cooled. Quickly. Xenia refused to let that happen quietly. Month after month, she appeared in public alongside Jane Young, reading prepared statements, repeating her plea to half-filled rooms. Cameras still rolled, but fewer people were watching. 5 months passed. Then, in a small town roughly 30 miles north of Conway, a different incident unfolded. A 34-year-old machinist named Nathaniel Kibbe was driving home when another vehicle struck his car. He got out, furious. He hit the woman with the handle of a pistol, knocking her to the ground. Police arrested him at the scene. What they didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that the man in custody was the same person who had taken Abby months earlier. As part of the arrest, Kibbe was ordered to surrender his firearms. That order mattered. He owned many of them. Officers expected resistance. He had strong views about the Constitution, about personal rights, about authority. Instead, he called police himself. He asked them to come immediately. That alone stood out. That doesn't usually happen, not like that. When officers arrived at his property, one of them, Eric Benjamin, noticed something else. A large shipping container sat in the backyard, bigger than necessary, out of place. When asked what was inside, Kibbe shut the conversation down. The order, he said, was about weapons. Nothing more. They didn't push. They had no grounds to. And by then, Abby's name barely surfaced in news cycles. Most outlets had settled on their conclusion. She had run away. Not everyone agreed. Local stations continued covering the story. Abby's friends refused to let her disappear quietly. Online, messages accumulated on the Bring Abby Home website. Videos. Letters. Short notes written late at night. "We miss you, Abby. There's nobody else like you. Please come home." It was like they were talking into the dark, hoping it reached somewhere. Inside captivity, things changed again. After the arrest, Kibbe grew increasingly suspicious. Afraid of attention. Afraid of mistakes. Abby was kept restrained constantly. He installed tubes and pumps beside her bed, so she could drink without assistance while he sometimes disappeared for days at a time. Isolation deepened. Then he decided to move her. He said she knew too much. He put her in the trunk of a car. The drive lasted a long time. When it ended, he carried her inside and dropped her onto a mattress in a new room. This space became permanent. The door was reinforced. Screws. Wires. He told her the room was rigged. If it was forced open, it would ignite. That was how he explained safety. When he tied her restraints, he began talking. For the first time, really talking. He told her about juvenile detention, about how people there were treated, about learning control. 6 months into captivity, he started sharing pieces of himself. Conversations followed, long ones. He challenged her beliefs, argued about God, about freedom, about individualism. He spoke with certainty. She listened carefully, not because she agreed, because listening kept her alive. Even as the conversations lengthened, Abby never lost sight of who he was. Whatever calm appeared on the surface didn't erase what he did to her. The worst violence had passed, but the abuse never truly stopped. It showed up regularly, predictably, week after week. It wasn't something that ended. It just changed shape. There was one moment she never forgot. He fell asleep beside her. She woke facing the door and realized something was different. No blindfold. She turned her head and saw his face. She reacted instantly, sat up, covered her eyes, not out of modesty, out of fear. He had told her before that she could never know what he looked like. That forgetting was required. Seeing him felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But time kept moving, and slowly, Abby noticed a pattern. When she treated him less like an enemy and more like a person, his behavior softened. Not kindness, less violence. He liked being listened to. He gave her books, stacks of them, anything to occupy the hours. Among them was a cookbook she read repeatedly, not because she loved cooking, but because it was there. One day, she noticed a name written inside the cover. Nate Kibbe. She asked him who that was. The question landed harder than she expected. He hesitated, looked unsettled, asked how she knew that name. The mask came off soon after. Not just physically, emotionally. He talked more. About his past, his beliefs, his anger. He lectured her about freedom, about government, about ideology, about why he believed the world was broken. It sounded less like teaching, and more like needing someone to hear him. Eventually, his ideas turned into plans. He talked about counterfeiting money, said the government owed him, said it was justified. Abby didn't challenge him. She agreed, helped, did what kept him calm. As they spent more time on that project, his attention shifted. The abuse toward her didn't disappear, but it wasn't the focus anymore. He began seeking out sex workers instead. One of them, a woman named Lauren from Nashua, later described her time with him as strange. Not violent, just heavy. He didn't want what she expected. He wanted to talk, to be reassured. He touched her hair, her face, until she fell asleep. When she woke, he was gone. Money was left behind. $50 bills stacked on a table. Later that day, at a grocery store, one of those bills raised concern. The cashier stepped away, returned, said police were coming. The bill was counterfeit. Lauren didn't wait. She called Kibbe immediately. Furious, she accused him of risking her freedom. Even though she only knew him by a false name, she gave police what she could, his email address, and a clear description of his damaged car. Back underground, Abby didn't know any of this had happened. She only knew the door flew open. Kibbe stormed in yelling. Agitated, unfocused, the kind of energy that could turn dangerous without warning. Abby didn't react the way fear wanted her to. She reached out, spoke calmly, asked what was wrong. She knew how to slow him down by then. After 9 months, Abby understood his patterns, his triggers, how to keep her voice even, how to listen without challenging, how to stay still when stillness mattered. Her survival depended on 2 things, listening and staying calm. Neither came naturally. Both were learned under pressure that never let up. Kibbe spoke quickly, too quickly. He explained himself in fragments, then told Abby to leave the room. When she stepped out, something didn't line up. The door behind her, the one wired to explode, opened into a space she recognized immediately. The concrete, the layout, the air. It was the first room. She hadn't been moved months earlier. Not really. The long drive, the darkness, the distance, none of it had been real. He had driven in circles, then brought her back to the same bunker, just another section of it. The realization landed hard. That kind of discovery, it rewrites everything you thought you survived. Inside his actual house, Kibbe did something unexpected. He removed the shock collar, then handed Abby a black plastic bag. For a moment, anything seemed possible. Another location, another trap, or the end. But this was the fracture point in the story. 9 months earlier, he likely would have ended it without hesitation. Now he didn't. Somewhere along the way, through conversation and familiarity, he had formed an attachment. Twisted, dangerous, but real. Abby had complicated his certainty. They got into the car. As the road passed beneath them, Abby tried to prepare herself. She imagined being left in a different state, or transferred to someone else, or never allowed out at all. Then she saw a road sign. Conway ahead. Her heart accelerated before her mind caught up. Kibbe slowed the car, pulled over. The location was precise, exact. It was where he had taken her nearly a year earlier. In a final, almost unbearable irony, Abby finished the walk home herself. The same boots on her feet, the same stretch of road. A journey paused and resumed months apart. But freedom came with conditions. Before letting her go, Kibbe issued a warning. He told her the civil case against him had been dropped, that his firearms had been returned, that if she ever said his name, he, or others who shared his beliefs, would retaliate. Abby believed him. To protect her family, she stayed silent. When the public learned she had withheld his identity, the backlash returned. Loud, familiar. People questioned her again, blamed her again, replayed the same doubts raised months earlier when the letter surfaced. Even without her testimony, there had been another path. Lauren Monday's report about counterfeit money could have led authorities to Kibbe sooner. But timing mattered. At that point, New Hampshire was dealing with a broader counterfeit operation involving unrelated groups. The signal was lost in the noise. Eventually, the weight became too heavy. With her family beside her, Abby made a decision. She gave the name to the FBI. She didn't do it quickly, she did it carefully. Federal agents coordinated with local police. They prepared a large-scale operation and went to Kibbe's property. He surrendered immediately. For the next 2.5 years, investigators worked alongside Attorney General Jane Young, assembling the case piece by piece while Kibbe remained in custody. The evidence accumulated. By the end, there were 183 charges on the table. Kidnapping, repeated sexual assaults, counterfeit production. The list was exhaustive. Kibbe accepted a plea deal covering 7 of those charges. The sentence guaranteed decades, between 45 and 90 years. After that, life began again. Slowly. Abby finished high school, became a hairdresser, something she had wanted long before any of this happened. She became a mother. Later, an executive producer on a film based on her experience. But her most important moment came earlier. On May 26, 2016, she stood in court and addressed Kibbe directly. Not to argue, not to accuse, to speak. It wasn't about him anymore. You could hear that. She told him she needed safety, for herself and for her family. That none of what happened had been her choice. Not the gun, not the house, not the threats. She spoke about carrying the experience like weight, about still feeling chained at times, about parts of freedom she would never recover. Then she said something else. She said she valued life differently now. That sunlight looked different. That freedom meant more. She said she had always seen him as human. And she said she forgave him, not to absolve him, but to finally let herself walk forward. Story 3. This story begins with Melissa Oxley, though no one would have known her name yet. Hours before police cameras would later record her face, she was in bed beside her husband, Ben Oxley, in a small home where routines felt settled and ordinary. Their marriage had lasted just over a year, long enough for Melissa to legally adopt Ben's daughter, Alyssa Oxley, on the same day she became his wife. To outsiders, it looked complete, stable, finished, the kind of family picture that doesn't usually end abruptly. Before dawn on February 21st, 2008, the stillness of that bedroom broke. A single shotgun blast. Ben Oxley was struck in the head while lying in bed. He did not survive. Melissa would later say she had been asleep beside him, that she noticed nothing until she woke and saw blood on her body. No injuries of her own, no memory of a sound. Police struggled with that explanation almost immediately. It's hard to reconcile how close she was to him, and how little she says she noticed. Investigators would return to the same question again and again. If someone entered the room, aimed, fired, why was only one person harmed? Melissa insisted she was not pretending, that she slept through everything, that the blood was not hers. The scene itself offered no easy answers. The front door stood open when officers arrived. The house was dark, no lights on, no movement, just silence pressing in from every room. They moved carefully, toward the bedroom. Later, the focus would narrow sharply onto Melissa. Her proximity, her account, the absence of forced entry. But something didn't sit right. If this had been random, if an intruder had stood there with a weapon, the woman in the same bed would have been the most obvious second target. She was right there, and yet she wasn't harmed. Police believed they were looking at a staged scene, that the person who called for help already knew what they would find. What they did not yet understand was that someone else had been awake that night. Someone small, quiet, forgotten. Years earlier, Ben Oxley's life had already fractured once. In 2004, in Minden, Ben was a newly single father navigating a bitter separation. Shared custody gave him limited time with Alyssa, then just 3 years old. He filled every hour he could with her. She went everywhere with him. Errands, events, even a Valentine's celebration where father and daughter danced together while butterfly kisses played in the background. People close to them noticed how singular his focus was. Everything he did seemed to orbit around that little girl. Ben wasn't searching for a new life. He was building one that could include her. When he eventually met Melissa, he didn't keep those worlds separate. On their very first in-person meeting, Alyssa came along. Her approval mattered more than romance. The encounter was uneven. Alyssa was openly territorial, protective, unimpressed. Melissa noticed it immediately. She wasn't offended. She was intrigued. Rather than pulling away, she leaned in. Found the jealousy endearing. Found Alyssa herself impossible not to love. Slowly, the three of them began to move as a unit. By September 17, 2006, they were standing at an altar. Alyssa, now 4, walked as the flower girl. During the ceremony, Melissa knelt in front of her and fastened a bracelet around her wrist. A promise etched into metal. A vow not spoken aloud. Shortly after, the court granted Ben and Melissa full custody. Alyssa's biological mother was no longer sharing time. The household expanded to include Melissa's teenage brother, Craig. From the outside, it looked settled, permanent. No one imagined how fragile it actually was. Back in the early hours of that February morning, the 911 operator listened as Melissa described waking in blood-soaked sheets. Her voice shook. Her words came out uneven. Alyssa was awake too. She pleaded to see her father. She tried to move past Melissa toward the bedroom. Melissa held her back. Then there was a sound elsewhere in the house. Melissa told the dispatcher she thought someone might still be inside. That moment, when she mentions a noise, it changes the tone of the call. Police arrived minutes later. The open door, the darkness, the quiet. What they did not yet realize was that the child in the house had already seen something long before the sirens arrived. Something that would not make sense to anyone for a long time. Officers stepped closer to the bed. The shape beneath the blankets doesn't move. For a moment, it reads as a body. Then the blankets shift. A young man sits upright suddenly, startled, hands lifting into the air on instinct. His eyes are unfocused, his voice unsteady as he speaks into the darkness while firearms are trained on him. He gives his name. Craig. He is 17 years old. Melissa Oxley's younger brother. He had been living in the house. In the hallway, Melissa stands frozen. Blood on her clothes. A phone clenched in one hand. Alyssa held tightly with the other. Her face looks blank, not injured, not calm either. Just stunned. Police move fast after that. Every room is cleared. Closets. Bathrooms. Corners. No one else is found alive. Only Ben Oxley, still in the master bedroom. The wound is immediately obvious. A shotgun blast to the back of his head. The position of his body suggests he never woke up. The way he was lying, it suggested the shot came without warning. There are no broken windows. No forced doors. Nothing disturbed outside the bedroom itself. It doesn't feel like an intrusion. It feels internal. Investigators begin narrowing the circle. People who lived there. People who had access. Craig becomes the first focus. On his nightstand, 2 shotgun shells are found. They belong to him. He hunts. He knows firearms. He owns equipment. And Ben was killed with a shotgun. That combination is hard to ignore. Craig says he was asleep. Deeply asleep. That he didn't even understand what was happening when police entered his room. Did you shoot Ben? No. His doors were closed, he says. He didn't hear anything. Police don't take his word for it. They wait for the tests. When the results come back, the room quiets. No gunshot residue on Craig's hands. No physical evidence tying him to the weapon that night. Nothing placing him in the bedroom. His account, unlikely as it sounded, is supported. So the attention shifts. Now it settles fully on Melissa. She was next to Ben when he was killed. She was covered in blood. And yet she wasn't hurt. Investigators struggle with that gap. Being that close to something like that, it's hard to understand how someone notices nothing. Melissa repeats the same story. She woke up after. She didn't hear the shot. She doesn't know who did it. Detectives don't believe her. But belief isn't enough. There is no physical evidence. No weapon. No residue. No witness, at least none they know about yet. The truth is, the case stalls. Both Melissa and Craig are released. Then another detail surfaces. A life insurance policy. $400,000. All designated to Melissa if Ben died. She says she didn't know about it. To Ben's family, that detail changes everything. Once that policy came up, people started seeing the case differently. In town, the assumptions harden quickly. Whispers turn into certainty. To many, the explanation feels obvious. A wife. A bed. A shotgun. Survival. Why wasn't she shot too? The scrutiny follows Melissa everywhere. Meanwhile, the court turns its attention to Alyssa. To protect her, a judge orders that she be sent back to her biological mother. Ben's ex-wife, Dawn. The house is unfamiliar. New rules. New people. Dawn's partner. Other children. It is safe on paper. But Alyssa doesn't understand any of it. She misses Melissa. She misses the woman who tucked her in, who promised she would never leave, who held her wrist on a wedding day and called her family. And no one yet realizes that the child they are trying to shield is the only person who truly knows what happened that night. Alyssa is 6 years old, and grief arrives before she has language for it. Her father had been constant, present, the person who showed up, the one who rearranged his life around her needs. To her, he wasn't a victim or a case file. He was the parent who never missed things. That absence settles in quietly, then all at once. She wants the house back, the mornings, her dad, Melissa, the way things were supposed to stay. But the home she's sent to now sounds different. The adults talk when they think she isn't listening. Names come up. Accusations. The same sentence repeated in different voices. Melissa. Her birth mother, Dawn, says it plainly. Says she believes Melissa killed Ben. She told me she thought my stepmom did it. Alyssa doesn't agree. Not really. Even when she doesn't know how to argue back. What she remembers feels real to her. The love. The routine. The safety. She holds on to that. And quietly, she holds on to something else. Something she hasn't told anyone yet. Investigators hadn't expected this. A child witness hadn't been part of the equation. But when Alyssa finally speaks, it isn't dramatic. It's small. Fragmented. The kind of detail that slips out when a child is trying to be precise. She says she woke up that night, heard a sound, a creak near the front door. She looked. She saw someone walking inside. Not a face, not a name, just a person. That was the first time we realized maybe someone else had been there. That single observation disrupts everything. If Alyssa is telling the truth, then Melissa wasn't alone with Ben that night. And Craig wasn't the only other person in the house. The investigation shifts direction. Detectives begin retracing Ben's relationships. Old conflicts, custody battles, unresolved tensions. One name keeps resurfacing. Dawn. After Ben's death, Dawn regains custody of Alyssa. Something she had wanted since the divorce years earlier. On the surface, it looks like a reset. A second chance. But investigators begin pulling records. Talking to people. Patterns start forming. Dawn has a history. Neglect. Long absences. Leaving her children behind while staying elsewhere. Calls coming in from kids asking for food. Help. Basic care. When children are calling neighbors saying there's nothing to eat, that's not a small issue. There's more. Drug addiction. Alcohol. Repeated jail time. Petty crimes. These weren't recent problems. They were the reason she lost custody to Ben in the first place. Alyssa had already lived through this once. Now she was back in it. Detectives bring Dawn in for questioning. They ask where she was the night Ben was killed. She says she was home. That nothing unusual happened. Who was there? Her sons, Devin and James. And another boy. James Metlin, a friend of the family. It's after 4 a.m. Investigators ask who is still awake. James. They ask about the nature of that relationship. She denies anything romantic. Says they're just close. Friends. But the background check paints a fuller picture. James Metlin has a criminal history. Time in and out of prison. Recently staying at Dawn's house. The circle tightens again. What no one says out loud yet is that the person Alyssa saw entering the house may not have been a stranger at all. And the idea that the truth has been nearby from the beginning starts to feel less hypothetical. That night, James says he never left the house. According to him, he and Dawn stayed in. Watched a movie. Fell asleep. A simple story. Comfortable. Almost too complete. Detectives don't argue right away. They listen. They let it sit. Because something about it doesn't fit. On paper, it sounded solid, but it didn't feel settled. James Metlin is brought into an interview room. Small. Quiet. A table between him and the detectives. The questions come steadily, circling the same point from different angles. Did you kill Ben Oxley? No. Do you know who did? No. Did Dawn have anything to do with it? No. Was there any planning? No. He looks at them as he answers. Holds their gaze. Says he had nothing to do with Ben at all. There's still no physical evidence tying either James or Dawn directly to the crime. And both deny everything. But time matters now. If they're involved, Alyssa is living with them. Melissa waits on the outside, legally powerless. All she wants is to see her stepdaughter again. But wanting isn't enough. Without proof, the child stays where she is. So detectives change tactics. They stop asking, They start watching. Surveillance begins openly. Cars visible. Officers seen in the same places. Pressure without words. They want Dawn and James to feel it. While following them, something else surfaces. Despite earlier denials, people start mentioning that Dawn and James are more than friends. A relationship. One that had been hidden. That omission matters. Then comes the break. Video footage from a nearby convenience store shows James there in the early morning hours after the murder. Which means he left the house. Which means the movie story isn't true. Once that footage came in, the story shifted. Detectives bring him back in. They remind him of what he said the first time. That he never went anywhere. That he stayed inside all night. Now they know he didn't. They don't accuse him yet. They just let the inconsistency hang in the air. If he lied about leaving the house, what else isn't true? Even so, it still isn't enough for an arrest. The case threatens to stall again. Until someone else walks into the station. Devin, Dawn's teenage son. Alyssa's half-brother. He looks shaken, like he's been carrying something heavy for too long. He says he needs to talk about the night before Ben was killed. What he describes isn't a plan. It's a mood. Anger. Repetition. Obsession. He tells investigators that Dawn ranted about Ben. About child support. About losing Alyssa. About how her life had been ruined. She kept circling back to the same blame. It wasn't just frustration, it sounded personal. Devin's account changes the temperature of the case. Suddenly, Dawn's motive sharpens. And then James breaks. He comes back in and tells a different story this time. He admits Dawn pushed it, that she framed it, that she told him what needed to be done, that the plan wasn't his. With Ben gone, the monthly child support, about $200, would end. Custody would shift. Control would return. The pieces align. James says he was manipulated, used, that he believed he was helping Dawn reclaim her life. Now he wants to tell everything. He says they went to the house together that night. Inside, the shotgun was already loaded. 2 shells. Dawn stayed outside, moving quickly, starting the car, preparing to leave. James stood in the bedroom. Ben was asleep. He raised the shotgun. Then he shifted it, toward Melissa. And that is where the story pauses. On the moment before the choice that would unravel everything. His finger stayed on the trigger. Not pulling it. Not releasing it either. For a moment, everything stalled. Breath. Weight. Sound. Then something broke inside him. The barrel dipped. The choice shifted. He turned and ran. His steps thudded down the hallway, then away from the room. Out the door. Toward the car. Melissa was still alive. So was the child in the next room. When James finally told police what he had done, and what he had almost done, the reality landed hard. Alyssa had been living in the care of the people responsible for her father's death. The danger hadn't passed. It had been sitting beside her. Knowing where she'd been living, that was difficult to process. Alyssa never changed her story. Not once. She talked about the person she saw that night. The figure near the door. The presence that didn't belong. She never blamed Melissa. Not even when adults around her did. In the end, the person behind it all wasn't a stranger. It was her mother. After Dawn and James are taken into custody, Alyssa is finally brought back to Melissa. The reunion is quiet at first. Then it isn't. There's relief. And underneath it, grief. Being together again doesn't erase what's missing. It only makes the absence clearer. They move forward anyway. Because stopping isn't an option. For years pass. On January 31st, 2012, they walk into a courtroom together. Alyssa is 10 now. Old enough to understand where she is. Old enough to remember why. The damage hasn't faded. It sits deep. Healing isn't linear. But she stays in her seat. She watches. Melissa takes the stand. She faces the man who fired the gun. The one who took a life and nearly took another. Her voice holds steady as she speaks about the loss. About what was taken from Alyssa. About the foundation that was destroyed. You could hear how much she was carrying, even when she stayed composed. Devin testifies too. In the years since the arrests, he has left his mother's house, joined the army, built distance from the chaos he grew up in. He tells the court about neglect, addiction, a home that never felt safe. Dawn's parental rights are terminated. She is sentenced for other crimes tied to her record. But when it comes to the murder itself, the evidence against her remains indirect. She accepts immunity in exchange for testifying against James. The alliance collapses. James pleads guilty to first-degree murder. Life without parole. Justice finally has a shape. And then, as he is led away, Alyssa asks for something no one expects. She wants to speak to him. Just once. That request, it caught everyone off guard. She tells him she forgives him, that she wants him to have hope. At 10 years old, she chooses mercy. Not because the pain is gone, but because she doesn't want it to define what comes next. That choice opens a door she can walk through. Life doesn't reset. It reshapes. Melissa builds a family that looks different than the one she imagined, but no less real. She welcomes Brandy, Alyssa's half-sister, into their home. Another child displaced. Another space made safe. They learn how to live with memory instead of running from it. Melissa thinks about Ben without replaying the night he died. She holds on to what he gave them. The laughter. The care. The way he loved. Alyssa carries him too. I think he still loves me, and I know I'm doing better now. He isn't gone from their lives. Not really. He exists in routine. In warmth. In the way the house feels when they come home. On her wedding day, Melissa promised to stand with Ben and Alyssa for life. That promise didn't end when everything broke. It endured. Because the love they chose is the love that stayed. Story 4. A woman pressed against a wall, hands over her eyes, sliding downward as if the strength leaves her all at once. This is where the record stops for Crystal Mitchell. She pushes herself upright again. There's a glance over her shoulder, quick and sharp. Then she moves toward the elevator that leads to the parking area. For a moment, it looks like distance has been gained, like the danger might have passed. It hadn't. Crystal was 30 years old when her life ended. She had been traveling in San Diego with a man she'd only recently begun seeing. Investigators would later confirm that this man had a prior conviction for domestic violence. By the time police began asking questions, he was already gone. The cause of death was personal. Hands, not tools. Pressure applied until breathing stopped. There was no object to recover, no blade to log into evidence. He didn't need one. As days passed without an arrest, concern widened beyond a single case. Detectives worried about escalation, about what someone like this does when he believes no one can reach him. That confidence didn't last. At that point, it stopped feeling like one crime. It felt like something still in motion. The person who disrupted that momentum wasn't law enforcement. Crystal's mother, Josephine Wenzel, had once worked as a detective. Grief didn't erase that training. It pulled it forward. She began tracking movements, contacting people, following rumors that police didn't have the time or authority to chase. By the time she arrived at one known address, he had already fled. Someone had tipped him off. That was the moment she understood this wouldn't be straightforward. Someone was always one step ahead. Reports began stacking up. Different locations. Different women. A neighbor described hearing repeated screaming from a nearby unit. Another woman spoke of routine beatings. Patterns started forming without needing to be named. The stories were coming from places that didn't seem connected. But they felt familiar. Josephine pushed harder. Not because she believed it would change what happened to her daughter. She was clear-eyed about that. This was about interruption. About stopping something before it reached another ending. She said she worried about the women he hadn't met yet. She said she wouldn't stop looking. To understand how this began, you have to go back. Late in 2012, Vancouver, Washington. Crystal Mitchell was 26. A single mother. Recently divorced. Planning a move that felt equal parts hope and loss. She wanted to leave the city she'd known her whole life. Arizona was the plan. Phoenix, specifically. A clean start, on her terms. That also meant leaving her mother behind. She told Josephine herself. Said she needed to prove she could stand on her own. I remember thinking she sounded steady. Nervous but steady. Josephine was proud. She didn't try to talk her out of it. Phoenix suited Crystal faster than anyone expected. She found work managing properties across the city. She built routines. She laughed easily. People noticed her smile first, then stayed for her warmth. She didn't want her children to lose their connection to family, so every year they spent several months back in Vancouver with Josephine. It worked. Until it didn't. The summer of 2016 broke the pattern. After the kids landed, Crystal called to say she'd decided on a spontaneous weekend trip to San Diego. Just a short getaway. She mentioned a new boyfriend. That call was the last time Josephine heard her daughter's voice. The next morning, Josephine sent a message. Then another. Nothing came back. The quiet didn't feel neutral. It felt wrong. When the phone finally rang, the number began with 619. She recognized it immediately. You don't think. You just know. Every parent has a version of that fear. For Josephine, it arrived with an unfamiliar area code and confirmed what silence had already said. The voice on the line said it was the San Diego police. Josephine didn't listen long enough to process the words. She ended the call and passed the phone to her husband without explanation. Seconds later, she heard his voice change. What? A pause. She's in a morgue? That was all she caught before her body gave out. She dropped to the floor, hands clamped over her ears, shaking her head as if refusal might undo what had just been said. Breath wouldn't come. Sound did. A scream that didn't seem to belong to her. I remember thinking, I don't want to hear this, even as I already knew. In San Diego, officers were responding to a call from a residential complex along Mission Gorge Road. A man living there had noticed something out of place in the hallway, a dark trail leading to his neighbor's door. He knocked, called out, then pushed the door open. Inside, he found a woman who did not move. Police secured the unit and began documenting the scene. There were signs of a struggle almost immediately. Disarray that didn't belong to a quiet weekend stay. The injuries told the rest of the story. Pressure applied to the neck with enough force to cause fractures. The conclusion came quickly. Strangulation. There were no witnesses. No one reported hearing a disturbance that night. Detectives widened their search outward, marking the garage, the walkways, the surrounding units. Evidence markers appeared, scattered, but none answered the central question. Who had been there with her? Sometimes what matters most isn't what you find. It's what isn't there. Crystal's vehicle wasn't in the lot. That absence shifted the investigation. License plate checks led them away from the complex, north toward the airport. Her car was eventually located in a parking structure near San Diego International. Parked. Abandoned. She hadn't driven it there herself. Another absence became impossible to ignore. Crystal had not been alone in San Diego. She was traveling with a man she'd recently started dating. A bodybuilder. A former Marine. His name was Raymond McLeod, and no one could say where he was. While detectives worked through the early stages of the case, Josephine was dealing with something entirely different. 2 children who still believed their mother was coming back. She focused on stability, routine, small moments that wouldn't fracture them further. Before telling them the truth, she spoke about their mother often. About love. About how proud she was of them. The funeral came a week later. After that, the children stayed with Josephine permanently. The word temporary was never used. You don't explain everything. You explain enough to get through the day. As the family tried to adjust, investigators began pulling McLeod's history. What emerged wasn't subtle. Prior convictions. A pattern. Violence directed at women. One case in Arizona involving his first wife. Another pending charge in California tied to an attempted strangulation of his third. The room for alternative explanations narrowed fast. Detectives tracked his movements after Crystal's death. A rental car. A route south. Border records confirmed what they suspected. He had crossed into Mexico. In many cases, that's where momentum slows. Paperwork. Delays. Waiting. Josephine understood the process. She'd lived inside it for years. And she also knew how long it could take. Days stretched into weeks. Weeks into months. Then a year passed. It wasn't enough. At some point, waiting starts to feel like choosing nothing. Josephine began working the case herself. Not officially. Not loudly. Quietly. Methodically. Every morning before dawn, she sat down at her computer. Online records. Archived articles. Old social media accounts. She reached out to strangers who might not even know why she was asking. Hour after hour. Day after day. This wasn't about being heroic. Or dramatic. It was about narrowing distance. About finding the one place he might have assumed no one was looking. Posters. Messages. Repeated questions sent into the dark. Have you seen this man? Josephine understood what she was doing. Searching for one person across multiple countries, across languages and borders, with nothing solid to hold on to. A needle, yes, but not just in a haystack. Something closer to a continent. She knew routine methods wouldn't reach that far. So she went looking where normal searches didn't go. One afternoon, moving through corners of the internet she didn't fully trust, She came across a tracking method usually reserved for federal investigations. A gray area process. Geofencing. Draw a boundary on a map. Feed in keywords. Wait to see what conversations surface inside that invisible box. She doesn't describe exactly how she gained access. Only that she did, and that it worked. A blog caught her attention. Written by a traveler. The post described meeting an American man in Guatemala. Former Marine. Covered in tattoos. Volatile. Aggressive. Waking up before sunrise and harassing women staying at the hostel. The details weren't subtle. Some descriptions don't feel random. They feel familiar right away. Josephine leaned in. Cross-referenced names. Locations. Timelines. Then she found a video. A short clip on social media. A muscular man dancing with a woman in a crowded space. Loud. Chaotic. Nothing remarkable at first glance. She slowed it down. Watched it again. Frame by frame. At one point, the man turned his head. Just enough. She didn't hesitate. That was him. It had taken months to reach this point. She knew what hesitation could cost. One warning, one delay, and he would disappear again. She contacted the U.S. Marshals. Information passed. A team mobilized. They went to Guatemala. He was already gone. Someone had tipped him off. He moved before they arrived. The trail went cold again. That part, that's when it really set in how protected he was. Josephine didn't retreat. She widened the lens. If she couldn't reach him directly, she would make it harder for others to hide him. She began speaking publicly, naming the danger, describing how charm had been used as cover, warning people not to mistake confidence for safety. She addressed those helping him too, said the responsibility didn't stop with the man committing the violence. Then she kept going. Interviews followed, documentaries, podcasts, television segments, news appearances. She believed attention could apply pressure where warrants hadn't. It was during this period that the reports grew darker. From Central America came accounts of a woman being beaten repeatedly. Neighbors said they heard screaming through the walls. One described injuries so severe they didn't understand how she survived. When people say it casually, like it's just something that happens, that's hard to hear. Josephine didn't soften her response. She said catching him wouldn't undo what happened to her daughter. But it could interrupt the pattern. It could stop another ending from forming. Rumors multiplied. Nightclubs, drugs, fights, assaults, violence that followed him from place to place while authorities stayed just behind. Each report hardened her resolve. She said she worried about the women he hadn't met yet, about the ones who didn't know his name. She believed time was working in his favor, that the longer he stayed free, the more untouchable he felt. And that belief, she said, made him more dangerous. In 2019, the case reached national television. America's Most Wanted aired multiple segments. Josephine appeared on the program herself. This time, she didn't speak to the audience. She spoke to him. I wanted him to hear it clearly. She said she would never stop looking. She said she would never stop, not until it ended. When Josephine spoke about her daughter, she was careful with her words. This wasn't about revenge. She made that clear every time. Crystal, she said, was someone who gave without hesitation. If you were cold, she would hand you her jacket. If you were struggling, she would notice. Her children were the center of her world. Justice mattered because of them. She wanted them to grow up knowing their grandmother didn't look away, that she kept going when it would have been easier to stop. I wanted them to know I tried. Every single day. Federal agencies had been involved since the beginning. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the United States Marshals Service. But Josephine's discoveries forced the pace. Raymond McLeod was added to both agencies' most wanted lists. Investigators believed his violence was escalating, that he wasn't just dangerous to individuals, but to anyone around him. The case spread outward, beyond the United States. Police forces across several Central American countries circulated his image. Posters, alerts, quiet briefings. Then, in late August of 2022, a tip came in. A woman reported seeing him in a club, said there was something unsettling about him. She called it in from El Salvador. That morning followed the same routine as dozens before it. Breakfast dishes, backpacks by the door, the children leaving for school. Josephine sat down with her coffee and opened her laptop. Her geofencing alerts pointed to a small city on the western edge of El Salvador. Sansenet, She began scrolling. One image stopped her. A thin white man standing in front of a whiteboard. English words written behind him. Children seated nearby. His face looked older, narrower, but still familiar. She zoomed in, then paused. His arms were covered. Long sleeves. No tattoos visible. She kept going. Another photo appeared. The same man. This time with other teachers. Then another. A nightclub. Different angle. Clearer light. She didn't need to zoom. It was him. There wasn't any question left after that. She didn't wait. She contacted the U.S. Marshals immediately. This time there was proof. Enough to act without delay. A federal fugitive warrant was approved. Marshals traveled to El Salvador and coordinated with local police. They prepared for resistance. He had been seen with firearms before. They expected the worst. Josephine received the call as the operation began. They were at the location. They were moving in. He didn't fight. By then, his face had been everywhere for years. Posters, news segments, screens. He stepped outside and surrendered. The lead marshal called Josephine afterward, told her plainly that without her work, he wouldn't have been found. That was the first time it felt real. McLeod was extradited and flown back to San Diego. When Josephine stood before reporters, she didn't celebrate. She stated a fact. He wasn't getting away again. Even then, one question remained unresolved. How a man without visible income managed to stay hidden for so long. How he moved, who helped him, and why. That answer would come later. The financial picture surfaced before the case ever reached a jury. Raymond McLeod wasn't surviving on luck alone. His parents had money. On the same day Crystal was killed, they sent him $10,000. After that came private attorneys in San Diego, high-profile consultants, even a familiar television name brought in for the early proceedings. Dr. Drew Pinsky was presented as an expert. For Josephine, that choice said everything. She saw it as delay dressed up as credibility. The hearings dragged on. Dates were pushed. The preliminary hearing alone was postponed again and again, stretching the process past 2 years. It felt like time was being used as a weapon. Inside the courtroom, the defense strategy became clear. Accidental death. That was the phrase. Repeated. Insisted upon. Josephine listened as lawyers argued that her daughter's killing wasn't intentional. That it happened during a consensual act. That Crystal had somehow asked for it. She couldn't reconcile the words with the facts. There was blood. A visible trail leading from the apartment toward the elevator. Not a mark. Not a stain. A path. I kept thinking, accidents don't leave trails like that. The prosecution played the security footage. Crystal collapsing. McLeod's hands rising to her neck inside the elevator. The images were brief, but unmistakable. His grip. Her body folding downward. It didn't resemble consent. It didn't resemble confusion. The defense pressed on anyway. Prosecutors responded by widening the frame. They spoke about McLeod's past. Other women. Other assaults. An attempted murder case involving his former wife, Rachel. A pattern that didn't begin or end with Crystal. A witness from that earlier attack testified. She described opening a door and seeing McLeod on top of Rachel. Hands at her throat. Blood mixing with sound. Rachel unable to speak. Barely breathing. Others had to pull him away. More than once. Even after he was forced into the hallway, he tried to go back. Tried to put his hands around her neck again. When you hear it laid out like that, it doesn't sound accidental anymore. Still, the defense minimized it. Tragic circumstances. Unintended outcome. Words chosen carefully. Delivered calmly. The courtroom absorbed it in silence. After the preliminary hearing, attention shifted to Josephine. Not as an investigator this time. As a witness. She knew she would have to face him eventually. Sit in the same room. Speak while he listened. The thought didn't feel abstract. It felt immediate. In the fall of 2024, during a podcast interview, she admitted she wasn't sure how she would hold up on the stand. Whether grief would take over. Whether her voice would fail. The host didn't let the doubt sit. You've already done the hardest part. You didn't stop. Josephine didn't respond right away. The trial was scheduled for January of 2025. She said she wasn't satisfied yet. Not with the arrest. Not with the extradition. Not even with the charges. Justice, to her, had a specific endpoint. A conviction. A life sentence. No room left for interpretation. She said she would stay involved to the very end. the same way she had during the search. Watching, asking, refusing to step back. I'll know we're done when there's nowhere left for him to go. What carried her through wasn't optimism. It wasn't closure. It was endurance. She said the pain didn't disappear. It changed form, became something usable, something that moved her forward when everything else had stopped. She turned it into motion, and once it started, she didn't let it slow down. Story 5. The call came in during the summer of 2007. It wasn't from a neighbor. It wasn't from a passerby. It was from a 15-year-old girl, her voice strained, the sound of other people moving behind her, everyone in the house fighting at once to stay alive. They believed someone had broken in. A stranger. A burglary gone wrong. That assumption didn't last. Across the region, warnings had already gone out. Doors locked. Windows checked. Attacks were appearing along highways, spread out enough to feel random, close enough to feel intentional. Law enforcement was still treating them as isolated incidents, trying to stack timelines that refused to line up. Then something small shifted the picture. A movie. A pattern hiding in plain sight. Scenes replayed, not on a screen, but in real homes with real people. One victim at a time. The person responsible thought he was recreating something familiar. He didn't expect resistance from this house. He didn't expect to be remembered this way. The date was July 13th, 2007. West Hanover Township, Dauphin County. A quiet development not far from the highway, the kind of place people choose because nothing ever happens there. Todd and Darlene lived there with their 2 children, Nick and Nicole. The routines were ordinary. Work, school, evenings that passed without notice. It looked like any other street. Nothing about it suggested urgency. Darlene was known for talking. Long calls. Late hours. She liked people, liked being out, liked staying connected. Todd didn't share that rhythm. He went to bed early. That difference had been growing heavier over time. That night followed the usual pattern. Around 10 o'clock, Todd said he was turning in. Darlene told him she would be right behind him. He didn't believe it. She was still on the phone, laughing quietly the way she always did. Hours passed. Sometime around 2 in the morning, the tone changed. On the other end of the line, her friend heard it first. A sudden scream. Then movement. Then nothing. The call ended without explanation, not like her calls ever ended. He didn't wait. When he arrived at the house, Darlene was already gone. Not unconscious. Not injured. Gone. The scene made no sense to him, and he ran to the door, pounding, shouting, hoping someone inside would answer. No one did, so he called for help. Todd woke to shouting. Men he didn't recognize. Commands coming too fast to process. Hands raised. The room filled with light, cameras flashing. He thought it was a robbery. Some kind of mistake. Then the words reached him. Darlene was dead. Someone else had done this. That moment changes how a house feels. Even after everyone leaves. In the kitchen, his son was restrained, screaming. A chair broke under him. The sound carried through the house, mixing with instructions and radios and footsteps that never seemed to stop. Investigators searched for an entry point. A broken lock. A forced window. Anything that would explain how an outsider got in. They didn't find one. No damage. No struggle leading outside. Nothing missing. The focus shifted inward. Todd was grieving, but grief didn't remove suspicion. He agreed to testing. He answered questions. When the results came back, they didn't help him. The indicators suggested deception. An investigator asked about knives. Todd explained. Construction work. Leather tools. Blades of all kinds. It sounded reasonable until a drawing was placed in front of him. The shape mattered. The size mattered. Did he own one like this? He said no. That was when he realized how narrow the room had become. Once that line is crossed, every answer feels heavier. There was still the matter of timing. Darlene's habits. She liked the patio at night. She stayed up late. Whoever approached her would have known that. This wasn't a random interruption. It was someone familiar with her routines, comfortable enough to be close without raising alarm. That detail carried weight. Investigators returned to the marriage. Arguments. Distance. The way emotional pressure builds quietly between people who share a life. It wasn't accusation. It was process. Most cases like this follow a familiar arc, and law enforcement is trained to walk it whether they want to or not. Todd and his son had been in the house and reported hearing nothing. No cries. No warning. That absence lingered in the room during every interview. The doubt didn't stay with the police alone. It settled over the family. You can feel suspicion, even when no one says it out loud. For Nick and Nicole, the questions followed them. Their mother had no known enemies. She was social, open, remembered for warmth more than conflict. And yet, the story surrounding her death kept narrowing instead of expanding. The truth hadn't arrived yet, but it was already moving. The question kept circling back on itself. Why her? Why at all? What kind of person decides that someone like Darlene should simply be erased? There was no answer that settled, only the growing sense that the wrong explanation was being examined too closely. While investigators remained fixed on Todd, convinced the answers had to be inside that house, the person responsible had already moved on. Distance didn't slow him. It seemed to energize him, and no one yet understood that what tied these events together wasn't a person or a place, but an idea lifted from somewhere else entirely. 2 weeks passed. In Bloomsbury, New Jersey, Monica Massaro had stopped showing up. She was 38, known in town without trying to be. A familiar face at the local bar. Someone who showed up for live music, stayed late, talked easily. In a town that small, routines are visible. When they break, people notice. Monica ran a cleaning business. Missed appointments stacked up quietly at first. Then the concern turned outward. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. When an officer arrived at her home, the first detail stood out immediately. The door wasn't locked. Unlocked doors tend to change the tone of a call right away. The handle moved with barely any pressure. Inside, the house was still. Nothing on the first floor explained the silence, so the officer moved upstairs. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. Open just enough. Through the gap, part of a leg was visible, hanging over the edge of the bed. That was enough to stop forward motion for a moment. When the door was pushed open, the scene didn't settle into focus the way real things usually do. Blood everywhere. Too much to process all at once. The injury was clear even before details were. Her throat had been cut. The violence was extreme, almost excessive, the kind that doesn't suggest hesitation. Investigators would later describe it as uncontrolled. Rage-driven. The kind of act that feels personal even when there's no known relationship. But there were no names to attach to it. No clear suspects. Days of processing yielded nothing usable. No DNA that could confidently point outward. There were sightings, though. Residents mentioned a man moving through the neighborhood that night. Checking doors. Looking into windows. Enough to widen the theory instead of narrowing it. Either someone close to Monica, or someone testing houses at random. The second possibility lingered. Less than a day later, close to 11 at night, another town. Another woman. Another interruption of routine. She was walking her dog when she noticed him standing in the street. Dressed entirely in black. A mask covering his face. Blades secured at his sides, visible even in low light. As he started toward her, instinct took over. She ran. Doors slammed. Locks clicked. The call went out immediately. You can hear panic before the words catch up to it. She stayed on the line, whispering updates as sounds reached her through the house. The front door. Movement. Something being tested. But the door held. When officers arrived, the street was empty again. This time, though, there was something new. She had seen him clearly. Not a shadow. Not a guess. A man in black, moving deliberately. The way he carried himself stuck with her. Unnatural. Purposeful. Word didn't stay local. It crossed state lines fast. Reports followed. A figure dressed like something out of a movie, armed with knives, appearing and disappearing. People checked locks twice. Then a third time. Fear travels faster when no one can name it. The murders were scattered. Different towns. Different victims. Too fast for a clean sequence. But one detail kept resurfacing. The same injury. The same point of focus. A deep cut across the throat. Back in Pennsylvania, Todd was still answering questions. Still under scrutiny. Even as new attacks occurred and his timelines held, suspicion didn't release its grip. The investigation lagged behind the movement of the person they hadn't identified yet. The count kept rising. So did the tension in every place the man might pass through next. And then in late July, one family in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, would be forced into his path. July 30th. The McDonough family. A quiet house, until it wasn't. Kevin and Jeannie McDonough had been part of each other's lives since their teenage years. High school turned into marriage. Marriage turned into a family. Two children, Ryan and Shay. Sundays meant church. Weekdays meant routine. They were visible in the quiet way stable families often are, always present, rarely loud about it. That night didn't feel unusual at first. Shay came home late after being out with friends. Before heading to bed, she checked the locks. Not out of fear. Out of habit. Her brother sometimes forgot his keys, and she didn't want to be woken hours later to let him in. It felt practical, protective, ordinary. Just before 4 in the morning, something broke the stillness. A faint sound, sharp, like glass giving way somewhere else in the house. It didn't register immediately. Then a shape filled her doorway. A man, dark clothing, a knife already visible. She didn't scream. She didn't have time. His hand covered her mouth. The blade pressed against her neck. The words came low and close, meant only for her. If you make any noise, I'll kill you. Panic arrived fully formed. She kicked backward, forcing her body against the bed frame, doing the only thing that made sense, trying to make sound. Enough to travel. Enough to wake someone. In the next room, Jeannie heard something small. Not a scream. Not even a shout. Just a strange, muffled noise. Easy to dismiss. Like a bad dream. Kevin sat up at the same moment. He said he would check. Jeannie said she would. It wasn't how they usually decided things. But that morning, something overrode routine. Sometimes you move before you understand why. When Kevin stepped into Shay's room, everything stopped. The man was there. Bigger than expected. A knife at Shay's throat. One hand clamped over her mouth as she fought to breathe. Kevin didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, aiming for the knife, for anything that might slow the man down. The room erupted. Furniture shifted. The sound finally carried. Jeannie ran. She saw black clothing. A mask. A stranger locked in a struggle with her husband, inches from her daughter. There was no pause. No calculation. She went straight for the blade. She shouted without realizing it, telling herself what to do out loud. Get the knife. It was larger than she expected. Heavy. The man's hand swallowed the grip. Her fingers couldn't dislodge it. The strength difference was immediate and unmistakable. So she grabbed the blade itself. The pain didn't register right away. Only pressure. Resistance. Blood followed after. You don't think about consequences in moments like that. Shay watched everything from the bed. The knife. The size of the man. Her parents fighting someone who looked impossibly large. Instinct took over again. She yelled for her father to get a gun. Even though there wasn't one. Even though she didn't know why she said it. It worked. Just enough. The struggle stretched on. Minutes passed without shape or sequence. Arms locked. Bodies shifting. No one letting go. Somewhere in the chaos, Shay broke free and ran. Down the hall. Phone in hand. Fingers barely cooperating. Her voice shook as she spoke to the dispatcher, trying to explain something that didn't fit into sentences. The man was still inside. He had a knife. Her family was holding him. In the bedroom, Kevin and Jeannie clung to the intruder with everything they had left. But blood changes things. Kevin saw it streaming down Jeannie's hands, pooling where she gripped the blade. For just a second, his focus shifted. That was all the man needed. He surged upward, forcing himself off the bed, Kevin still on his back. The sudden movement broke the balance they'd been holding onto. That's when control slips, even if only for a moment. As he stood, the knife tore free. It slid through Jeannie's hands. She felt it go and knew instantly how close they were to the end. The thought came fast. Clear. Final. This is it. He lunged for the doorway, desperate to escape the weight of hands and bodies holding him in place. He almost made it. Almost. Kevin and Jeannie caught him again, dragging him back, refusing to let momentum decide the outcome. Control came and went in flashes. One moment he was pinned. The next, he was thrashing hard enough to break it. It kept shifting, like no one ever fully had him. Kevin fell back on something old. Muscle memory from a different life. Wrestling mats. Coaches shouting. He wrapped his arms high around the man's neck, knowing size alone wouldn't be enough. Air was the only leverage he had. He pulled backward, putting his full weight into it. The man resisted, but balance finally gave. They crashed to the floor together, the sound dull and heavy. Down the hall, Shay was still on the phone, words tumbling out faster than she could organize them. Descriptions blurred. Mask on. Mask off. Big guy. Knife. Her dad holding him down. The dispatcher stayed with her, steady, anchoring the moment while everything inside the house felt unstable. Outside the bedroom, she waited. 10 minutes stretched thin. Too thin. The noise inside dropped away completely. No shouting. No movement. Just silence. She didn't know which way it had gone. Then headlights cut through the dark. A patrol car rolled past the house. That's when hope finally had somewhere to land. She ran toward the street, waving frantically. The cruiser stopped. Words spilled out again. Officers moved fast, straight into the house, boots pounding toward the bedroom. Shay followed, heart racing, bracing herself for whatever waited on the other side of that door. Inside, her father was still there, pressing the man into the floor. Her mother stood above them, gripping the knife. It took a second to understand what she was seeing. Then it clicked. Officers moved in, cuffs snapping closed. The struggle ended as abruptly as it had begun. For the first time that night, air returned to the room. No one cried. Not right away. Shay hugged her father, holding on as if letting go might undo everything. Kevin was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the delayed weight of what almost happened. It hadn't settled yet. Not for any of them. It takes time for your body to catch up to reality. As they stepped out of the room, Jeannie and Shay clung to each other, neither willing to create distance. The house felt altered. Same walls. Different meaning. The man was taken to the station. His mask came off under fluorescent lights. Adam Leroy Lane. Early 40s. No long criminal record. The kind of name that doesn't explain anything on its own. Investigators learned he lived in Jonesville, North Carolina. Quiet town. Wife. Children. A life that looked stable from the outside. He worked as a truck driver, crossing state lines routinely. His vehicle had been parked near the McDonough home. That truck changed everything. Inside were knives. Large ones. A belt with sheaths hanging from it. Wire meant for choking. A mask cut for eyes and mouth. Tools chosen, not improvised. This wasn't a burglary. As detectives continued sorting through his belongings, more details surfaced. Logs. Receipts. Travel records. Evidence of movement that lined up too closely with recent crimes. And then the movie. A disc left inside a player. The title stood out immediately. Hunting Humans. That was the moment the pieces stopped feeling separate. The film wasn't subtle. Violence without motive. Killing for the act itself. A character explaining that reasons only make you easier to catch. Investigators started making calls. Other states. Other departments. Asking the same question again and again. Have you seen this pattern? The answer kept returning the same way. A throat cut. A clean, deliberate injury. The scenes from the movie weren't fictional to Lane. They were instructions. Each attack mapped. Each victim placed carefully into a role he'd already imagined. He wasn't improvising. He was following a script. It became clear that he wasn't drifting from crime to crime. He was repeating something. Reenacting it. A story already written somewhere else. Played out again in real houses, with real people filling roles he had already assigned. Back in New Jersey, that realization landed with Officer Jeff Noble. He had been leading the investigation into Monica Massaro's death, and the details had never sat right with him. The violence, the lack of theft, the absence of motive. When word reached him about a masked intruder captured in Massachusetts, something aligned. Not cleanly, not yet, but enough to raise his hand and make the call. He contacted the team holding Adam Lane, certain there was overlap, but certain he wasn't evidence. Monica's case still had no completed DNA work tying Lane directly to her murder. Without that, there would be no interrogation, no access. Then the phone rang. The investigators in Massachusetts had started retracing Lane's movements. Where he'd stopped, where he'd fueled up, what he'd kept. They were looking for proof of travel. Sometimes the smallest paperwork matters the most. A receipt surfaced. Bloomsbury, New Jersey. The date stood out immediately. Late July, 2007. Right inside the window when Monica was believed to have died. That was enough. Jeff Noble didn't hesitate. He headed to Chelmsford. The interview started gently. Neutral ground. Simple questions. How long he'd been in the area. Lane answered calmly. Politely. He looked ordinary. Sounded ordinary. Nothing in his tone hinted at urgency. For more than an hour, he never asked why they were there. That silence told us more than the answers. Jeff noticed it immediately. Most people want to know what they're accused of. Lane didn't. He didn't need to ask. Then Jeff mentioned the movie. The shift was instant. His posture changed. His voice tightened. He tried to minimize it, framed it as a taste for horror, suggested he was being misunderstood. Jeff didn't circle the point. He didn't soften it. He told Lane he knew what he had done in Bloomsbury. To Monica, Lane didn't argue. He didn't explain. He looked away, shook his head once, and said he was finished. The recorder was turned off. Chairs scraped back. The officers stood and walked out. They were halfway gone when Lane moved. A small gesture. A nod. No words. They turned back. When they sat down again, Lane finally spoke. He confessed to Monica Massaro's murder without drama, without detail. Just enough to close the gap. Then he added something else. Casually. Almost as an aside. He said he cleaned his knife every week. That line stayed with me longer than the confession. After that, he went quiet. No more admissions. No more clarity. Investigators suspected more victims along his trucking routes, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, but Lane never confirmed it. The full number would remain unknown. There was a shared belief among those working the case. They had intercepted something early. Not at the beginning, but before it could stretch further. If the McDonough family hadn't fought back, no one could say where it would have ended. With the confession in hand, the focus widened. Knives were sent to labs. Cold cases were reviewed. Routes were mapped. Justice, at least partially, came into view. The first trial belonged to the McDonough family. For the first time since that night, they faced Adam Lane again. This time under lights. Behind thick plexiglass. No mask. No shadows. Seeing him still felt unreal. He stared. Too long. Too often. It unsettled everyone in the room. When the family took the stand, they walked through the night piece by piece. The sounds. The movement. The fear. Shay noticed his eyes on her constantly. It ignited something sharp and uncontrollable. Anger came faster than fear ever had. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict followed. Adam Lane was sentenced to 25 to 30 years in prison for what he did in Chelmsford. For the McDonoughs, it was accountability. Not closure, not relief, but an ending to one chapter, and only the beginning of another. Fear never really left him. It stayed close, but it no longer dictated where he stood. Even sitting in the courtroom, knowing what that man was capable of, Kevin felt something else pulling stronger than fear. A refusal to look away. A belief that once someone crosses into your home and reaches for your family, you don't get to disappear afterward. I needed him to know I was still there. The McDonoughs kept showing up, not because they were required to, but because it felt unfinished otherwise. When their own legal process slowed, they followed the next one. A month later, they traveled again, this time to stand beside Monica Massaro's family. Her parents were elderly, smaller somehow than the room they were sitting in. Jeannie remembered hugging Monica's mother, not knowing what words were appropriate, saying what little she could anyway. The pain didn't need explanation. It was already shared. That trial ended with no mercy. The details were laid bare. Monica had been killed deliberately, watched as she died. Her body violated after life had already left it. No one in the room could explain how a husband and father arrives at that place. The sentence followed. 50 years in New Jersey State Prison, then another 50. And still, that total didn't yet include what happened in Chelmsford. By then, numbers didn't feel real anymore. While sentences stacked up for Adam Lane, someone else remained suspended in uncertainty. Todd Ewalt, still living under a shadow he hadn't earned. Still marked by suspicion he couldn't erase. That changed quietly. The lab results came back from one of Lane's knives. DNA profiles surfaced. Not one. Not two. 5 separate victims. Darlene Ewalt was one of them. The reconstruction finally made sense. Doors tested. Houses checked. Then a patio light left on late into the night. An opportunity, nothing more. No history. No connection. Just proximity and visibility. It really was that simple. And that cruel. There was no personal motive. No relationship. Darlene had been chosen because she was there. Because she was visible. Because the hunter decided she was next. The evidence spoke where she no longer could. Her blood became testimony. It cleared her husband completely. Todd prepared to face the truth in public, even knowing what that process would cost emotionally. When the McDonoughs heard, they went again. So did the Massaros. Outside the courthouse, they noticed a man sitting alone near the railing. Head down. Disoriented. It took a moment to recognize him. It was Todd. They didn't need introductions. You could tell he'd been carrying it alone for a long time. Inside the courtroom, tension shared space with grief. Tears came easily. Lane showed nothing. No reaction. No acknowledgement. Just absence. As the case progressed, concerns grew. A full trial would reopen wounds. Darlene's death dissected again. And the risk, real, not hypothetical, that a defense might redirect blame back onto Todd. By then, Adam Lane was already serving 80 years. Todd accepted a plea agreement. An additional 10 to 20 years. No death penalty. No drawn-out trial. It didn't feel like compromise. It felt like containment. Nothing about a sentence changes what's already gone. With that decision, the case is closed. Justice, in its limited form, arrived for all the families. Afterward, in the hallway, the Ewalts and McDonoughs stood together. No longer strangers. Kevin hugged Todd, feeling the imbalance of survival settle heavily in his chest. Why one family was spared, another shattered. No one had an answer. What remained was connection. Jeannie stayed in touch with Nicole Ewalt. Calls that ended with "I love you." Not dramatic. Just habitual. A second mother, in a way neither of them had asked for but both understood. A bond formed there. Quiet. Durable. Built from loss and refusal to turn away. The McDonough family survived that night. But survival wasn't the end of their story. Standing their ground became part of who they were. What they did didn't stop with their own survival. It moved outward, quietly, into other lives they never meant to touch. An innocent man was cleared. A dangerous one was contained. And the path ahead for others changed because one family refused to let go. Some people call them heroes. Not in a loud way. Not in the kind that asks for recognition. Just in the way outcomes speak for themselves. They change things for people they'll never meet. At night, when the house is finally quiet again, Jeannie still looks over at Kevin and feels the weight of it settle in. Not fear. Gratitude. The simple fact that he's there. That their daughter is there. That the morning came at all. He protected all of them. Himself included. Not because he planned to. Because there was no other option. The thought always drifts further, though. To Monica. To her parents. To the Ewalt family. To the question that never fully leaves. Why this house? Why this night? Why did it stop here? You don't stop asking that, even when you're thankful. Jeannie believes something larger intervened. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. That Adam Lane reached their door, because that was where it would end. That whatever carried him across states finally met resistance strong enough to stop it. Not fate as an explanation. Fate as a pause. They didn't choose to be part of this story. But when it arrived, they stood their ground. And because of that, others didn't have to. Story 6. The recording opens without warning. A small voice, barely above a whisper. Someone asks if she had been home that day with her mother. Yes, the child answers. Then, after a beat, she's dead. The adult voice reacts automatically. An apology. A soft reassurance. The child doesn't pause. The big boy did it. The room goes still. This is Jade Scotton. She is 3 years old. 5 hours earlier, her mother, Alita, was discovered inside their home, unconscious on the floor. A lethal mix of insulin and methamphetamine was already in her system. On paper, it could pass as an overdose. But the child keeps talking. What big boy? The investigator asks. Not correcting her. Not leading. Letting the words come from her. I don't know what he did. Another question carefully shaped. Was there one boy? No. 3 boys. 3. They were little boys, she says. Then corrects herself. My mom said they were grown-ups. The adult voice checks again. Grown-ups or kids? Grown-ups. There's no confidence in it. Just repetition. She tries to explain what she saw. Pieces don't line up. Movements instead of motives. Someone came inside. There was rolling on the floor. Someone stepped somewhere they shouldn't have. And killed my mom. At that moment, investigators don't know what to do with her account. A 3-year-old. Trauma. Imagination. Memory shaped by fear. They record it anyway. 5 months pass. The house is no longer just a scene. It becomes part of a larger pattern. Phone records. Old resentments. Money moving in quiet ways. Eventually, the outline sharpens. A woman named Vicky Arlene Jensen. An ex-wife. Anger that didn't fade. Jealousy that calcified. She didn't confront Alita herself. She hired others to do it. 3 teenagers. Promised payment. Enough cash to sound convincing. Around several $1,000s, rounded and untraceable. The target wasn't random. It was personal. Jade's mother had not overdosed. She had been killed. When you hear it laid out like that, it feels obvious. But it wasn't obvious at the time. The case becomes known for something else. Not the method, not the motive, the witness. A toddler, describing something no one wanted to believe she could understand. Years earlier, a different town, a different child, a different silence. June 1985. This time, the problem isn't too many words. It's none at all. 7-year-old Melissa Ackerman vanished in the middle of the day. She had been riding her bike with her friend Opal in a small Illinois town where people recognized each other's cars. Opal escaped. She jumped from a moving vehicle. Melissa did not. By the time police arrive, Opal is physically safe. But she won't speak. Not to officers. Not to her parents. Not to anyone. The tape that survives begins gently. Do you like to draw? The idea isn't conversation. It's space. Talk if you want. Draw if you can't. The woman asking the questions is in Burgess. The bureau brought her in quietly. Not because she outranks anyone, but because she understands something others don't. Children don't always respond to questions. Sometimes they respond to permission. She wasn't trying to pull answers out. She was waiting to see what would come up on its own. Outside that room, the town is unraveling. Search teams comb roads and fields. Volunteers walk until their legs give out. Firefighters, deputies, neighbors who shouldn't have to do this. A description circulates. A man, unkempt, young, ordinary enough to blend in. Melissa had been last seen mid-morning. She and Opal had stopped at a house along County Line Road to ask for the time. The principal answered. Nothing unusual. Minutes later, their bikes were found lying in the road. No skid marks. No blood. Just absence. A frantic call comes in from a nearby home. A boy shouting into the phone. In the background, Opal, crying, gasping, unable to finish a sentence. Her friend was taken. That kind of call changes the sound of a police station. Everything after it feels louder. Investigators know the math. Every hour matters. Every detail compounds. Opal is the only witness who saw the man close enough to recognize him. She knows something. But trauma doesn't release information on demand. So Burgess sits with her. Paper. Crayons. Time. No pressure. No urgency in her voice, even though everyone else is running out of it. The case hangs there, suspended between what a child remembers and what she can bring herself to say. And for the people waiting outside that room, that gap is unbearable. Without a description, without a vehicle, there is nothing to chase. And time keeps moving anyway. The first day matters. The second day matters more. After that, with a confirmed abduction, the odds begin to slide downward, hour by hour, in ways no one wants to say out loud. By June 12, 1985, Melissa Ackerman has been gone for 10 days. No sightings. No credible leads. No physical evidence that narrows anything. Everything now rests on one person. Opal. She is 8 years old. And she still hasn't spoken. The Bureau makes a decision they don't make lightly. They bring in someone from outside the usual chain. Dr. Burgess is flown in from Boston. She teaches nursing at Boston College. She has worked with the FBI for years, studying repeat offenders, violent behavior, patterns that don't show up in reports. But that isn't why she's here. She understands victims, especially the ones who are small and quiet. They didn't need a profiler. They needed someone a child wouldn't be afraid of. When Burgess first meets Opal, nothing looks official. No desks. No interrogation room. Just a low table meant for children. She sits down so she doesn't tower over her. She introduces herself simply. I'm Anne. Then gently she asks about drawing. Not memory. Not the man. Not the car. Drawing. They can talk if Opal wants. They can draw if she doesn't. The first request is oddly specific. A picture of her favorite kind of weather. Rain appears on the page. Raindrops falling over a small figure. Burgess notices something off. Is that your favorite? Opal shakes her head. No. She likes the sun. The drawing wasn't about weather at all. Her attention never leaves Melissa. Progress comes slowly, measured in minutes that don't end with answers. Trust has to come first. You could see it. Everything she was thinking kept circling back to the same place. Burgess knows what she could do and what she won't. She could ask directly. What did you see? What do you remember? But that would push a child back into a moment her mind is still trying to survive. The goal isn't speed. It's safety. All the while, pressure builds outside the room. Agents waiting. Officers checking watches. A child's life is still unresolved. And Burgess is fully aware that whatever Opal gives them may be all they ever get. This isn't the first time Burgess has understood fear from the inside. Nearly 30 years earlier, Boston, Massachusetts. 1956. She is 19 years old, a nursing student, on her way to a sorority meeting uphill from campus. It gets dark before she's ready to head back down. Someone suggests hitching a ride. People do that then. No warnings. No stories yet. A car pulls over. She gets into the front seat, next to a stranger. Buckles in. Halfway down the road, the car slows, then stops. The man turns toward her. His expression changes. Something in it doesn't belong. She understands immediately. Fear hits fast. She screams. She says people will be looking for her. She hits the horn again and again until passing cars begin to slow. The driver hesitates. Just long enough. She unbuckles, opens the door, runs. He drives away. That kind of moment stays with you, even when nothing actually happens. That night, Burgess doesn't just feel lucky. She feels altered. She has seen how quickly a normal situation can tip into danger, how small the margin really is, and she makes a quiet decision that will guide everything after. She will work for victims. She will make people pay attention. Years later, sitting at a child-sized table with an 8-year-old who cannot yet speak about what she's seen, that decision is still there. Steady, unspoken, waiting. By 1978, Burgess is no longer just listening to individual stories. She is actively working with people who carry trauma every day. That is when the phone rings. She is in her office. Papers stacked. A routine afternoon. Her research assistant pauses in the doorway and doesn't step inside. She tells she should take the call, and waves it off. Says to take a message. She will return it later. The assistant doesn't move. She says it again, more firmly. It's the FBI. Anne's first reaction is confusion, not excitement. A fleeting thought about paperwork. Taxes. A mistake. Something administrative. Instead, the voice on the line asks about her writing. A book she published. Her research on victims. At that time, cases involving sexual assault were not prioritized. They were shelved, deferred, often quietly dismissed. The Bureau wants her to come teach. That kind of call didn't happen back then. Not for that subject. The offer isn't simple. It would mean travel, late nights, weekends, time away from home. She has young children. She hesitates. Then she thinks about leverage. If there is one place where change might echo outward, it's there. So she agrees. In 1978, Burgess travels to Quantico, Virginia. She expects resistance. She doesn't expect ridicule. She stands in front of roughly 40 agents. All men. Introduces herself. Begins speaking about victims. There is laughter. Not loud. Not hostile. But dismissive. At that time, many believed rape was about desire. That women invited it. That behavior explained everything. Questions reflected that thinking. Why were you out so late? Why weren't you watching your children? Did you enjoy it? The responsibility was pushed backward, onto the victim, and doesn't argue emotionally. She reframes. She talks about reactions. Fear. Dissociation. Memory gaps. She shifts the focus from what the victim did to what the offender chose to do. This changes how questions are formed. Not accusation. Understanding. What we now call trauma-focused interviewing begins quietly in that room. By 1985, and has spent 7 years reinforcing that approach. And now she is sitting across from Opal. The questions are gentle. They circle feelings before facts. What was the night like for you? Did you sleep? Opal hasn't slept much. Her thoughts keep returning to Melissa. She says sometimes it feels like the man is nearby, watching. Then she catches herself, says she knows he isn't there, and acknowledges that. Not correcting, just grounding. Opal avoids windows. She won't eat. When asked why, she explains she was waiting. She and Melissa were supposed to go to lunch. It has been a week. Those are the details that tell you where her mind is, not in the present. Opal is devastated, but she is also trying to help. There is something she wants to give, something that might matter, and understands the risk. A single poorly framed question could distort memory. could send investigators in the wrong direction. Time is already against them. Every minute that passes narrows the outcome no one wants to say aloud. Still and listens. Carefully. Back in 1978, only one section of the Bureau showed real interest in her work. The Behavioral Science Unit. It sat below ground level. Literally out of sight. That is where her ideas were first allowed to take root. Years later, in a small room with a child who is finally beginning to speak. Those ideas are no longer theoretical. They are all that stand between silence and whatever truth Opal is able to reach. And remembers the first time she was taken down there. An elevator with no floor numbers. It drops past ground level, then keeps going. 2 floors down, the doors open. No windows. Thick walls. Concrete everywhere. It is quite literally a bomb shelter. That is where a small group of agents has been working. Out of sight, out of favor. Projects that don't fit policy. Some approved. Some ignored. Some quietly tolerated. Down there, it almost doesn't matter. No one upstairs is watching closely enough to stop them. The first assignment, and is invited into, is treated as a joke by much of the Bureau. Interviewing serial killers. Not to trap them. Not to prosecute them. But to understand them. Most agents think it's pointless. A misuse of time. A misuse of money. But cases keep piling up. Victims with no clear motive. Crimes without logic. And someone says it out loud. If we don't start learning something now, 10 or 20 years from now, we'll still be guessing. The mind of a serial predator is uncharted territory. Why strangers? Why repetition? Why escalation? Anne's position is simple. Thoughts come first. Behavior follows. If you want to stop what someone does, you have to understand what they tell themselves before they do it. This is where the early framework begins to form. What will later be known as the Mindhunter approach. At the time, it didn't feel historic. It felt experimental, almost reckless. The work isn't officially sanctioned, so it happens quietly, and isn't allowed in the interview rooms. She listens instead. Tape after tape. Hours of recorded voices. Men describing how ideas grew inside them. How something internal crossed a line, and never came back. She hears the same phrases. The same emotional turns. The same justifications. Not the violence itself, but the thinking around it. What stands out isn't chaos. It's structure. The problem is, none of this is organized. The agents conducting the interviews aren't researchers. There's no system, no consistency, no method, and starts doing what she knows how to do. She listens. She writes things down. Words that repeat. Experiences that recur. Childhood markers. Emotional triggers. When something appears once, she notes it. When it appears again, she underlines it. A third time, it becomes something else. A pattern. Questions begin to change. Which questions open the door? Which ones shut it immediately? Order matters. Distance matters. How far back you ask someone to go matters. Categories begin to form. Data piles up. For the first time, there is something to work with. June 13th, 1985. Back in Illinois, and is again sitting at a small table. This time with Opal. Progress has been steady, but fragile. Now comes the moment that can't be avoided. And tells Opal she wants her to draw what happened that day. Not talk yet. Just draw. She asks about the weather. Opal answers without hesitation. It was hot. Sunny. She starts with the road. A long line. Then another. 2 directions. She adds the car. Then the man. Then herself. Then Melissa. When she started with the road, you could tell she was grounding herself first. The drawing slows everything down. Memory doesn't rush forward. It arrives piece by piece, and watches closely. Not correcting. Not interrupting. This is the point where things either open, or shut down completely. The same principles she learned in that basement, about sequence, safety, and restraint, are now being applied to a child's crayon drawing. What Opal is about to share won't come as a sentence. It will come as a picture. And whether investigators can make sense of it depends on whether they ask the next question the right way. Opal keeps adding details. 2 bicycles appear on the page. Different colors. Placed carefully. And asks what happens next. Because the scene is already drawn, the questions can follow the lines on the paper instead of forcing memory forward. This way. That way. The road. The direction of travel. The car moving opposite them. Opal explains it simply. The car stops. The man asks them to stop riding. They do. He asks for directions. How to get uptown. She tells him. Then something shifts. She says he steps out of the car. And that's when it happens. He grabs her first. She says he throws her through the window of the car. Head first. Not into a door. Behind her, Melissa is still on the road. The man moves fast. Comes up from behind. He goes back for Melissa. Opal says she tries to get out. She reaches for the door handle. There isn't one. That detail lands heavily. Already, and understands something critical. This wasn't impulsive. The vehicle had been altered. Someone planned this. When a child notices what's missing, that tells you more than what's there. But a single insight isn't enough. Patterns matter. Context matters. And knows that better than most. 6 years earlier, 1979, and has been consulting with the Behavioral Science Unit for just over a year when a name begins circulating through law enforcement. They call him the ski mask rapist. Louisiana is on edge. Homes are being entered quietly, through unlocked doors, open windows. Victims are surprised inside their own houses. In many cases, the attacker waits. Husbands return home. They are restrained. Then the assault begins. The crimes follow a structure. Surveillance beforehand. Telephones disabled. Control prioritized. State police announce the case publicly. The governor orders it treated as a top priority. Still, nothing slows it down. Communities react in fear. Gun sales surge. Windows are barred. Dogs are left loose at night. You could feel it spreading, that sense that nowhere was actually safe. By the summer of 1981, the attacks escalate. More frequent, more violent. The Behavioral Science Unit has no description, no vehicle, no suspect, and worries about what comes next. The level of harm suggests the offender is losing restraint. That if he isn't stopped soon, victims may not survive. Even though she is still technically a consultant and is sent to Louisiana, her task is different. She isn't there to interrogate. She is there to listen. She is anxious. This is no longer theory. This is an active case. The question pressing on her is simple. Can she help? She knows she has limited time with each victim. Trust has to be built quickly. She could ask directly what happened. Instead, she explains why the questions matter. That the goal isn't curiosity. It's stopping the person who did this. That reframing changes something. Victims begin to talk, not just about actions, but about sensations. Pauses, rituals, repetition, details that don't look important at first. But together, they begin to form an outline. Back in Illinois, and watches Opal's drawing again. The missing door handle, the order of movement, who was taken first. These aren't random memories. They are structure. The same principles and learned in a windowless basement. Listening to men describe what they planned long before they acted, are now helping decode what an 8-year-old survived. Time is still running out, but now for the first time, there is shape to what happened. And shape is something investigators can finally work with. Something changes once Opal understands why she's being asked. She isn't being tested. She isn't in trouble. She's helping. When that clicks, the hesitation loosens. She realizes the adults across from her believe her, and the information begins to come, and listens for a particular thing, not just facts, but residue. The memory that keeps looping, the thought that won't settle. It's the one that plays over and over, like a tune you can't turn off. That's the image that does the most damage, and the one that has to be handled carefully. You can tell when a child is circling the same thought without saying it, and has seen this before. Years earlier, working with adult victims, she watched the same pattern repeat. One moment that stays sharp while everything else blurs. Helping someone doesn't mean erasing that memory. It means taking away its power. In Louisiana, that approach had already proven itself. By the time and return to Quantico, the scope of the ski mask rapist case was clear. At least 25 assaults. 5 cities. A pace that was accelerating. Investigators were worried. Not about if the violence would escalate further, but when it would cross a line that couldn't be undone. And brought something back with her. Not just transcripts. Not just impressions. Patterns. Victims were selected carefully. Affluent neighborhoods. Predictable routines. The offender exerted control. Saw himself as dominant. He moved frequently. Avoided familiarity. That suggested education. Military experience. He liked expensive things, but couldn't quite afford them. He stole to maintain the image. A car came up again and again in interviews. Red. Sporty. Noticeable. A trans AM. Once the profile was circulated, something shifted. That's when people started seeing what had been there the whole time. A police officer in Lake Charles noticed a vehicle that fit. The timing, the behavior, early morning, a short drive, a stop at a local store. Just before 6, a man walked out carrying bread and cigarettes. He didn't get back into the car. He didn't need to. John Barry Simonis was arrested on November 27, 1981. He confessed to more than 80 attacks. No victims had died. That fact mattered. Still, the sentence was staggering. Thousands of years in prison. For survivors, it meant the threat was gone. For the community, it meant sleep might finally return. But the work didn't end when the case closed. For Anne, it accumulated. She learned to separate her days. What stayed at work, and what was allowed at home. Even then it leaked through. There were letters. Threats. Her husband suggested protection. They bought a handgun. Not because she wanted it, but because the danger no longer felt abstract. You're never just protecting yourself. You're thinking about everyone around you. Still, she kept going. June 13th, 1985, and is back at the small table with Opal. The drawing is nearly finished. The car, the road, the missing door handle. Opal repeats the part that matters most. She tried to get out. She couldn't, and asks what she did next. Opal doesn't hesitate. She went back out the way she was thrown in. She ran. She hid. Nearby, there was a John Deere sales lot. A large tractor displayed outside. Opal hid behind the tire. She draws it. This is where I was. Then the car starts. Melissa is already in the back seat. Someone is banging on the window, screaming. That's the moment that stays with her. You can hear it in her voice. After that, Opal loses structure. The drawing fragments. Small shapes. Disconnected pieces. The memory overwhelms the process. That final image, her friend taken away, still alive, still calling, is not something a child is meant to carry. It is the last clear picture Opal has of Melissa Ackerman, and it is the one that will never fully leave her, and understand something quietly but urgently. The best thing she can do for this child is bring her friend back alive. For that to happen, Opal has to keep going. They circle back to the drawing, and asks her to describe the car while her hand is still moving. Opal points to a shape. She says it looks like a pinwheel, but not really a pinwheel, and doesn't correct her. She lets the description sit. Then the man. Can you draw him? Opal studies the page. She says he looked like he was in his 20s. Not old. Not young. She adds details that don't sound dramatic. Things sticking out. Something yellow. Like shades. It's more than investigators had before. Kids don't always label things right, but they often see them exactly right. And knows this. Children may need help translating what they remember, but certain details land with precision. Then and shifts away from the event. She asks Opal something else. Have you thought about what you'd say to Melissa if you saw her again? Opal answers without hesitation. She would tell her everything she's been doing. She would tell her about the airplane she brought her, and asks if she can tell her that. Opal nods. For a moment, the future still exists in the room. It doesn't last. A deputy on patrol, miles from where anyone is still searching, notices something wrong. Too still. Too deliberate. Under a heavy rock, he sees 2 small feet. The kind of discovery that hits before it's fully understood. There are some updates you don't forget, no matter how many years pass. What follows moves quickly. Information Opal provided is shared. Descriptions circulate. Leads converge. A man is identified. The FBI charges a 28-year-old man from Aurora with the kidnapping and murder of Melissa Ackerman. His name is Brian Dugan. During questioning, he confesses. Not just to this crime. Authorities uncover a pattern stretching back over a decade. More than a dozen victims. Assaults. Murders. Melissa is the youngest. Others came before her. Dugan admits to another killing from years earlier. DNA confirms it. There is no ambiguity left. He is sentenced to life without parole. He will not leave prison. For the community, it means an ending. For families, it means a sentence that never really finishes. For investigators, the emotional cost is rarely discussed, especially by those who have children. There is no clean separation, no true way to shut it off. Every so often, someone pauses long enough to remember what the work actually represents. A chair that will never be filled again. A name that will always be spoken in the past tense. You don't stop seeing your own family in the middle of it, even when you try. For Anne, the work becomes both burden and anchor. It is how she processes what she has seen, how she tries to prevent it from happening again. You don't forget cases like this. You absorb them. You hope they teach you something useful, something that matters later. Years pass. Brian Dugan remains behind bars. Opal grows up carrying what she survived. The shock dulls, but anxiety lingers. Certain fears never fully release. In 2009, during a later court proceeding connected to another of Dugan's crimes, she sees him again. For the first time since she was a child. She watches him plead guilty. She makes herself stay. It is not closure, but it is finality. Today, Opal has a family of her own. A life built forward, not backward. As for Anne Burgess, it is that first meeting with Opal that clarifies something she had only sensed before. Her work doesn't just inform investigations. It changes outcomes. When Melissa's body was found, someone had to tell Opal. Afterward, Opal asked for paper. She said she wanted to draw. And even then, with everything already lost, that instinct remained. To put what couldn't be spoken into lines. We've reached the end of tonight's stories. Thank you for spending part of your night here with me. I hope you're able to leave these stories behind now and carry only the quiet that follows them. If you're listening before sleep, I hope the rest of your night is peaceful, your thoughts become a little lighter, and tomorrow begins gently. Until next time, thank you for being here. Good night and take care.